While an egg was being fried, someone arrived and congratulated Aram, saying they had heard that he won another contest. They even asked if it was a joke. This was not surprising, as his name was well known in the culinary field. From the photo, it was clear that he won awards one after another. The other person said it was obvious since this cook was incredible. One of the cooks commented that it's really good to work, but it's also necessary to focus on resting a bit. The man mentioned that he heard Aram would be on the highway tomorrow and suggested he should rest a bit. The man continued slicing his food without resting. One of the cooks asked the chef how that accident happened. The chef kept preparing the food while the cooks urged him to rest for now. After all, he might temporarily lose his hearing and sense of smell. The man replied that they didn't need to worry so much. He said this while already finishing preparing the food. He then picked up the food with his chopsticks and commented that most people recover quickly from that kind of accident. He took a bite and told them they worry too much. He started eating while thinking that he just wanted to get back to his normal routine. He swallowed the food, and then tears started to flow from his eyes. He hit the table, breaking all the plates with food on them. The protagonist complained that it had been a year and nothing had changed. He started crying in despair, complaining that life was tough. He knelt on the floor, lamenting that he was really trying but couldn't succeed. The protagonist complained that he couldn't taste anything because it still tasted awful. Some time passed, and someone rang the doorbell at the protagonist's house. The dishes were dirty in the sink, and the sound of the doorbell echoed loudly inside the house. The protagonist was sleeping and complained, asking what the hell it was this time. The man outside shouted that he had a delivery for him. The protagonist complained that they were bothering him at that hour just for a delivery. The protagonist decided to walk to the door. When he got there, he opened it and asked what delivery he had for him. The delivery man noticed a strong smell of alcohol coming from inside the house and said it was a real delivery from the delivery team. Before leaving, the delivery man said the protagonist could see how to use the device by looking at the homepage. He said this, and then bid farewell, wishing the protagonist a good day. The protagonist said he already imagined he would receive that. It was a kind of headset and a cartridge. He took the headset in his hand and thought he had heard about this real game that revolutionized the virtual reality world. The protagonist, holding the headset, said he never imagined there would be a day when he could play something. After all, he was always full of work, so there was no time left. He said that, apparently, you really can't predict what tomorrow will bring. He decided to open the game to see how realistic this real game was, since it was virtual reality. The game started, and on the home screen, a kind of fairy appeared, telling him to become the pioneer with thousands of users worldwide. She informed him that he would be the first ever with the water connection system. The protagonist kept watching his TV while the game fairy called him to prove he could feel the 5 senses in that virtual reality. The fairy, happy, informed him she was waiting for his dream. Then the home screen of the game, Real, appeared, informing that it was the world's first game with the Korean open server system. The protagonist, not understanding anything, asked what the hell that was. He decided to put on the headphones while thinking about the phrase the fairy said, "You will be able to feel the 5 senses." The protagonist then decided to drink a green liquid that also came with the game, while saying he didn't think it was possible anyway. After all, what would it change? Reality is a sham anyway. He then lay down with his virtual reality glasses on and thought it wouldn't hurt to try just once. After all, he should at least test it. He continued lying down, watching the writings pass through the virtual reality glasses. The information started to become more and more extensive. At that moment, the protagonist can only think about how much he wants to taste food again, as he lost his sense of taste after the accident. Just then, the system informs him that the game is restricted to minors. So, those under 18 years old cannot play the game. The system also shows a health warning, stating that if the player has issues related to brightness, they should immediately consult a doctor. Additionally, the player can exit at any time by saying, "End of system." At this moment, he sees a beautiful sunny field and a message saying, "Welcome to the real server of Korea." The protagonist is lying on the ground, not understanding what is happening. He is confused for a moment, saying, "What's going on?" He looks ahead and sees a system asking him to choose his physical characteristics. He recognizes this immediately. He notes that he needs to choose his first name and decides it will be Rice. He feels a bit lost in that system, saying it's his first time, so he doesn't quite understand. He sees a random appearance selection button and decides to press it since he doesn't need to worry about it. So he decisively presses the button that randomly chooses his appearance. His body starts to change as the system informs him that his name will be Rice and his appearance is in progress. He finally has his appearance completed. Now he has white hair, a youthful look, and is wearing a hoodie. The system informs him that Rice's characteristics are complete. He squints slightly as he observes a bright light coming towards him, right after the system says he will be teleported to the initial area. Rice then gets teleported to another place. In front of him, he sees several other players fighting some birds. At that moment, the girl from the initial screen appears, saying her name is Yuria, and she is an idol who debuted the game Real. Rice observes that world and can't believe what he is seeing. Yuria says she is there to support the dreams of all travelers. Before she can finish the sentence, she notices that Rice looks strange. Rice is more focused on the air he is breathing, thinking that he is a traveler then. He watches the wind rustling the trees and says that the air is very refreshing. He looks at how green the grass is and the good smell of the earth. Rice feels embarrassed, but imagines that it was just like this a year ago before the accident he suffered. The smell was very good. Rice starts sweating, imagining he would do anything to have a chance to feel something again. He then kneels down, grabs the grass from the ground, and says he needs to taste it to see if he can feel any taste this time. Rice simply decides to put all the grass in his mouth. People next to him ask what the hell he is doing. Another person asks if he has a mental problem by any chance. Rice starts crying with joy, saying that the taste is bitter, so that means he can really taste things again. He can't believe that this is happening. He starts saying that it's been a year since he tasted anything. He says this while a bird comes towards him. The enormous bird, which had a horn on its head, tries to attack Rice. Rice is bewildered by what is happening. The bird, which looks more like a giant chicken, tries to peck Rice's head. He starts screaming desperately, asking if that really is a chicken. At this moment, a man with pink hair arrives, striking the giant chicken's head. The man, laughing, asks Rice to stop daydreaming. After all, this is a hunting spot. After saying this, he asks if Rice is a beginner. Rice, looking at the man, asks what this hunting spot is and if it's a dangerous place. The man with pink hair, smiling, says that, as the name suggests, hunting spots are automatically dangerous, especially for a beginner. The man leaves happily and says Rice can keep the items the chicken dropped. Rice thanks him but wanted to ask more questions, as he doesn't understand anything that is happening there. Rice starts yelling, saying there were 2 of them. However, it's no use, as he realizes the man with pink hair has already disappeared. Rice looks at the eggs, and the system informs him that they are horned chicken eggs. Rice finds the name horned chicken egg strange, as it is quite unique. He wonders why it is an item since it is much larger than a regular egg. Rice is pensive, imagining what he should do with these 2 giant eggs. He then gathers a smooth stone and some branches, sets up a campfire, and places the eggs to fry. He figures that all he can do is try to fry the eggs he just obtained. Worried about the result, he takes a fork in his hand, an item provided by Spork. He stirs the egg to see if it's ready. After all, the only thing left is to taste it. Still concerned, Rice decides to bring the egg to his mouth. He puts it in his mouth and starts chewing slowly, as he hasn't tasted anything in years. He calmly swallows the piece of fried egg he put in his mouth. Rice is extremely happy, thinking he finally managed to taste a fried egg. He says it's a pleasure to know that egg, and tasting things is wonderful. Extremely happy, Rice says the taste is 1,000 times better than he remembered. He also comments that the egg yolk is simply sensational. Rice, still extremely happy, thinks that the taste of that yolk, the delicious flavor that can only be experienced when the yolk is still hot, is surreal. Several people are passing by, and Rice can only think that he was afraid he would never be able to taste anything again. He starts crying while eating the fried egg. To him, hope would never die. He observes the people in front of him fighting against the giant horned chickens and says that even if it's not real, he's still happy to have tasted something again. He watches 2 people fighting against one of the giant chickens and says he wishes all of this were real instead of a virtual reality game. He looks again at his fried eggs, which he is eating little by little, and says he is very happy with that moment, so he will just enjoy it as much as he can. At that moment, a girl looks at him sitting on the ground. The girl is trying to get his attention, but he doesn't hear her, so she decides to get closer and asks if he can hear her. She asks if he is really eating at a time like that. Rice asks if she was referring to him. The woman, awkwardly, says yes. She noticed he was on the ground eating something, and it seemed really delicious. She says she has the necessary ingredients and would give him a reward as well. Looking at Rice, the woman asks if he could make a fried egg for her too. She says to wait a moment, and she will go buy it. At this moment, Rice notices a system notification informing him that someone wants to do business with him. The system informs him that Mary has requested to do business for a fried egg and asks if Rice wants to accept or not. She, looking at Rice's food, asks if he could sell just one fried egg to her. Mary says that the smell was extremely delicious and that the food looked great. She says she wants to eat at any cost. Rice asks her how much she thinks a fried egg costs. She responds that she imagines it costs 500 of the local currency. Rice realizes he doesn't quite understand the values of that world. He then smiles and says it can be for 500 of the local currency. He thinks he never imagined he could sell food within the game as well. Rice continues preparing the egg while Mary watches, saying it looks very good. Mary is enchanted by the dish, saying it's almost like a portion of scrambled ostrich egg. She is fascinated and says she didn't know it was possible to eat in the game. She immediately takes a portion and puts it in her mouth. Rice is hoping everything goes well. After all, even though he's in a game, this woman is his first customer. Rice also says he is extremely anxious since he doesn't know if it really tastes good, as it has been months since he stopped being a chef. The woman, upon tasting the food, makes a scary face and asks what it is. Rice is shocked and wonders if the food was only good to him. He panics, wondering what to do now since she apparently hated the food. The woman says that the food is simply incredible. Rice is surprised to hear that because he feared the worst. Mary is extremely amazed, asking how he managed to make it taste so good. She says it's even more delicious than real food. She also asks if he is a genius, saying it's much tastier than high-class meals. Rice feels embarrassed and thanks her for the compliments. He starts to think that this is just his style. He didn't even remember the taste. Mary opens her system while saying that even the texture was incredible, identical to real life. She says she will get the money right away. She then takes a bag of money and gives him the 500. Rice realizes that at that moment, he was being paid for the food he cooked for a customer. Mary runs off while thanking him for the delicious food and saying she will want to taste it again soon. Rice says that's fine and thanks her for the appreciation. He just imagines how that simple gesture made his day amazing. Rice starts to think that this game is called real. He thinks that if he can really do whatever he wants there, he wonders if it would be possible to achieve his dreams there. He feels a bit sad, saying that it is just a game. Rice looks at the horizon and imagines that since he can't achieve his dreams in the real world because of the accident, he will achieve them in that game. Rice then says, "Exit the system." The system informs him that the game is shutting down. At that moment, he returns to the real world. He looks at his table full of bottles and thinks that the game exited quickly. He didn't imagine that it would feel like being in one world and returning to the real world. It was completely new to him. Rice tries to smell his room and already imagines that he won't be able to smell anything in the real world. The same goes for his taste. He puts his finger on his tongue and realizes he can't taste anything. Frustrated, Rice puts his hand on his head and says that unfortunately, that is his reality. He still remembers that he has a part-time job interview soon and he needs to eat before leaving. He is pensive since this is the routine he has always followed. Rice takes his game headset and puts it on the table, saying that unfortunately, it is just a dream. The headset remains on the table. He then gets ready and goes to the job interview. There, he says his name is Rim, and he is there to submit his resume. Remember that Rim is his real-world name, as is Aram. The interviewer starts interviewing Rim and says that he meets the requirements for the job. He asks Rim if he has quick hands, which would be very good. Rim, looking completely different after taking a shower and getting ready, says that yes, he can handle it with ease. The interviewer informs him that a kitchen assistant is not limited to just washing dishes. In addition, he will need to cook sometimes. The interviewer asks if that's all right. Rim responds that yes, it's not a problem. The interviewer tells Rim that it's okay because he doesn't seem like he will ignore these tasks, given his sincerity. The interviewer comes closer and asks if Rim is aware that kitchen workers have fiery personalities. The interviewer warns him because he doesn't want Rim to quit after a few days. Rim responds that he is aware and that it's not a problem. The interviewer then informs Rim that he can start the next day. The interviewer also says he will keep Rim's resume and certificate with him. Rim thanks him, but asks if he won't review the resume before finalizing the hiring. The interviewer asks why he would be so strict in hiring a kitchen assistant for a street diner. He just asks Rim to try to be useful at work and please not to be late. Inside the restaurant, a cook is preparing the food. This cook observes the owner hiring that person. Rim bows and thanks him for the attention, saying he won't be late and that they will see each other tomorrow. The interviewer, who is also the owner of the restaurant, says that's fine and they'll see each other tomorrow. Rim remembers his character in the game and thinks that even though he lost his sense of smell and taste, for now, everything is fine. He then looks at the sky and imagines that little by little, he will progress. Rim decides to return to the game, where his character is named Rice. A blonde-haired man is jumping, ready to attack the enemy. This enemy is a giant horned chicken, and he hits the chicken's belly squarely. At this moment, other chickens start chasing him. He runs away, calling them damned beasts. At that moment, a purple-haired woman prepares her bow and arrow to attack those chickens. She gets ready while asking him to be careful. She then shoots and hits the chicken's head squarely. The man doesn't even see it, as he is running away desperately with his eyes closed. The purple-haired woman asks the blonde man to be more careful. After all, this is the real game. She says he should be more cautious with his actions. He thanks her for the explanation and is amazed by someone wielding a bow and arrow like that. He says she was incredible. She asks if he really thought so since it was nothing special to her. The blonde man laughs, imagining he got the best teammate possible. Rice is beside them, preparing chicken meat for himself. The man and the woman continue talking, wondering if they should recruit more people for the team since they want to face the final boss. Rice is frenetically preparing the chicken meat that people left behind. He continues his preparation, imagining that the meat is extremely similar to real life. He remembers the introduction when Yuria appeared on the game screen, informing that the reality of the real game was unparalleled, and that it would turn dreams into reality. She also said, a pioneering fantasy life with tens of millions of users around the world. Rice thought it was misleading advertising when he saw that. He continues tasting the local plants and says he now really believes it, having experienced it firsthand. Even his thoughts have changed. He imagines that this real game is more real than real life, like a perfect illusion. He says this especially about the herbs he just picked. He swears it smells like rosemary. He wants to try it as well. Rice makes a sour face, saying he really shouldn't have gotten so excited to try it since it's extremely bitter. He looks at the sky and says that at least it's definitely rosemary. He finally prepares the meat and says he will try making chicken skewers. He seasons the chicken with a little rosemary and says that last time he only made fried eggs, so this time he wants to increase the difficulty a bit. He starts lighting a campfire while thinking he wants to try something more complex this time. Rice then leaves the chicken skewer roasting and can't wait to try it since it looks very good. The players nearby start to smell the meat and ask if everyone is smelling something good there. A person with a hatchet asks if that smell is extremely similar to grilled chicken by any chance. The man replies yes, but who would be crazy enough to be cooking something like that in the real game? People then notice Rice standing there holding the chicken skewer and wonder if that person is a user or an NPC in the game. They can't identify it since it's such a crazy thing. Rice is happy to finally finish his skewer, celebrating that it's his first meat dish. The system notifies that the delicious chicken skewer restores 15 hunger points when consumed. The people observing from a distance ask if that person standing is a chef NPC and if what he is holding is really a chicken skewer. Another comments that it's incredible since it appears he is selling something delicious. Everyone decides to run over to see. Rice, without wasting time, starts smelling that delicious chicken. He says that by the smell, it's definitely chicken. A girl approaches Rice and says she would love to try that chicken skewer and asks how much he would sell it for. The guy next to her whispers in her ear to ask the chef if he can lower the price a bit. Rice looks at them while thinking how happy he is at that moment, and then considers how much he should charge based on the fried egg he sold last time. Rice thinks for a moment and says he can sell it for 3,001. The people agree, so he takes some unicorn chicken meat and says he will prepare it immediately. Rice goes full steam ahead, cutting the chicken pieces. Some time passes, and everyone is eating the chicken skewer. A man compliments Rice, saying he is a true chef. He says that a skewer like that for 1,501 is quite expensive, but after tasting it, he realized it was really worth it. Meanwhile, the man in the blue jacket is extremely happy, saying that it was undoubtedly worth it. After all, he didn't even know it was possible to eat something so good in the real game. The woman is amazed and asks her husband if she can have another. The husband replies that it is really good, but unfortunately it's too expensive, so it's not possible. The man in the green beanie behind them just laughs, saying he hates couples. He says this while also enjoying the chicken skewer. At that moment, Rice is frantically preparing several chicken skewers at the same time. He watches the chicken frying little by little and says that the sound is incredible. Rice smiles, takes a knife, and continues to prepare the chicken, saying that he is slowly getting used to cooking exactly as he used to. Rice then starts to remember all the experience he gained in the real world. He imagines the time when he was a real chef and thinks that it was all very worthwhile. Rice is preparing several chicken skewers, while many people around are also tasting them. He thinks that, without a doubt, he will be able to start over again there. In the middle of preparing the chicken skewer, he touches the meat to take a piece off the skewer and notices something strange. The system notifies that an achievement has been unlocked, the achievement Fighter, which requires hitting monsters more than 1,000 times. Rice is confused, asking what that was. The system notifies that a skill has been acquired. Rice, reading it, asks, "What do you mean a skill has been acquired?" The system notifies that the skill in question is called Weak Point and is an F-rank passive skill. With this passive skill, the user can see the weak points of 1-star monsters. Hitting a monster's weak point has a high chance of killing it instantly. Rice reads this and asks, what a weak point is. What is a passive skill? What is all this? He has no idea what is happening. The system also notifies that Rice received another skill called Weak Point, an F-rank active skill. This skill focuses all the user's strength on the tip of their weapon, thus inflicting critical damage. It has an increased damage of 15% and decreased saturation of 30%. Rice reads this from the system and says that it seems this other skill is an offensive skill. Rice looks around and thinks these are interesting skills, and wonders if he should test them here. He sees some people fighting the unicorn chickens. One of the men asks how many of those chickens they need to kill for the boss to finally appear. The green-haired man replies that they probably need to kill about 50 more. They're probably close. Rice stands up, thinking he should do that too. After all, he can't just keep cooking what he catches. He should try hunting some unicorn chickens too. He stands still for a moment, and then, worried, wonders how he should start. After all, he has never hunted before. Rice then approaches a man who is in a frantic battle with a unicorn chicken and asks him for a moment. The guy, trembling, trying to hold off the chicken's charge, asks what he wants. Rice says that if it's not too much trouble, he would like to hunt with them. The green-haired man is completely baffled. The other man says he doesn't mind, and that Rice can do whatever he wants. He doesn't even know why Rice is asking. The green-haired man turns and asks Rice if he is asking to join their team. He also asks if Rice has a good weapon. Rice happily shows his knife, which he uses to prepare food, and says that this is his weapon. The men see a unicorn chicken approaching and say they will leave it for Rice to kill. If he can manage to kill at least one monster like that, they will let him join the group. Rice, terrified, asks how he will kill such a giant chicken by himself. The green-haired man tells Rice not to be scared. After all, it's just a game. At that moment, the weak point skill activates. Rice's eyes begin to shine, and he wonders what is happening. He notices something glowing on the chicken's head. Rice realizes that this is probably the effect of his new skill. He looks closely at the glowing spot on the chicken's head and thinks that must be its weak point. Full of confidence, Rice jumps with his knife towards the unicorn chicken, thinking he now knows its weak point. However, as he gets closer, the unicorn chicken headbutts him, throwing him far away and causing Rice to drop his knife. The men are startled by this. Rice falls hard to the ground, nearly unconscious. The men observe him on the ground and figure it was expected since Rice is a novice. The other man asks if Rice really believed he could defeat a unicorn chicken using just a knife. The men burst out laughing, asking if Rice is okay since that must have hurt. The purple-haired man, laughing hard, says it's too much for a novice and quite embarrassing. Rice tries to get up, but his body trembles a lot. He finally stands and sees the men fighting the chickens again. The green-haired man shouts to Rice, asking him to just watch the others fight since he clearly lacks combat skills. He also says he will give Rice another chance later. Rice can only think about how he totally failed and that it's more complicated than he imagined. Rice puts his hand on his head and thinks that, besides, when he got hit by the chicken, the pain felt very real. Rice wonders if he should give up hunting. He remembers when he was a novice cook, and his superior kept telling him that the food was going to burn, saying he was tired of reminding him to add a certain amount of water to the pot. Rice was always apologizing while his superior said it was okay. He just needed to empty the pot and start again. At that moment, Rice looks down, picks up his knife again, and runs towards the unicorn chickens, thinking he must try one more time. At that moment, the system notifies that the boss field has been created, and that the boss, unicorn chicken, is approaching. The men look up and see something gigantic approaching them. They take a closer look and see it is an extremely large unicorn chicken, almost 10 times their size. The man in the brown shirt asks if that is really the boss, and, if so, can they defeat it? The green-haired man replies that yes, he is 100% sure that this unicorn chicken is the boss, and they are definitely in trouble. The two decide to charge at the boss, saying they must at least try, since they have been after this boss for a long time. At that moment, The system notifies that the players Seeking and Hemo have entered the unicorn chicken field. Rice reads this and doesn't understand since the notification appeared suddenly. The system then notifies that the boss Unicorn Chicken will attack the mentioned players if they do not leave the field within 3 seconds. Hemo still doesn't understand and asks Seeking what is happening. The 3-second countdown begins as Seeking says he doesn't know what this is since he has never seen a related post on the game's forum. The countdown goes to 2, while Hemo says it's really the first time he's seen this. The countdown reaches 1, and they ask if this is a different boss. After the countdown, the system notifies in red that the boss, Unicorn Chicken, will start attacking the players Seeking and Hemo. The boss then looks at the two and attacks them immediately. They are startled by its speed. The man in the brown shirt starts trembling, asking, "What is that?" The Unicorn Chicken boss looks at one of the players and hits him squarely, throwing him far away. The green-haired man is shocked, screaming Hyung's name. Just as Hyung is thrown, Rice comes running to help fight the boss. The system notifies that the player, Rice, has entered the boss field Unicorn Chicken. The system shows a new warning that the boss will attack everyone within the field in 3 seconds. Rice becomes serious and imagines that if something goes wrong, he could really die there. The countdown starts at 3. At this moment, the Unicorn Chicken boss continues attacking the green-haired man, who defends himself with his shield. The countdown goes to 2, and the man is cornered, thinking that even though the boss is just a monster, this is too much for them. Rice runs towards them, saying to wait, that he will help. The green-haired man, indignant, tells Rice to stay away, or he will really die. The countdown goes to 1. Rice rushes with his dagger, and his skill activated. The system then notifies that the boss will also attack the player Rice. With his skill activated, Rice clearly sees the weak point of the Unicorn Chicken, even though it's in a very strange place. Rice runs up and stabs his dagger into the boss's weak point. The chicken is startled and begins to cry, not understanding how it got attacked there. The boss turns and looks at Rice. He is stunned as she looks at him. Then, furious, the boss starts pecking furiously at Rice, but the two men quickly run towards him and raise their shields to protect Rice. The green-haired man still complains, asking if this is serious. After all, he made it clear that Rice should flee. A man observing the fight from outside asks if that monster is real, as it's enormous. Hyung shouts that he will attack first from the other side. Seeking asks what he is thinking. He says he will immediately add them to the same group, so they need to hurry to defeat the boss. Rice grips his dagger tightly while Seeking shouts, "Not to worry. After all, it's just a game." Rice thinks that's true. He looks at the Unicorn Chicken boss attacking the two men and thinks that it's not even real, so he doesn't need to be afraid. He watches the giant chicken throwing Hyung away again and thinks that even though the game isn't real, how can he not be scared of that? The man in the brown shirt braces himself as he is thrown, then jumps at full speed towards the boss, shouting that he's attacked that boss so many times, so why won't it just die? The furious chicken turns to him and then attacks with its horn, piercing Hyung's stomach. Rice watches Hyung falling to the ground and can't believe that person is really dying. Hyung thinks all of this sucks, but he will reconnect later and apologizes to everyone for his failure. Rice starts to panic, thinking that apparently when a person dies, they disappear immediately. He wonders what kind of game is this real. Rice is impressed, thinking the game is too realistic, and even knowing it's fake, it still scares him. Seeking continues to defend against the boss's pecs, and thinks that the boss is really powerful, and he's not sure how much longer he can hold it off. Seeking closes his eyes, and thinks he won't be able to defend much longer since his HP is extremely low. At this moment, Rice activates his weak point skill and jumps at the boss again, always aiming at the spot indicated by the skill. Rice is holding a horn as a weapon, and the horn is overflowing with energy. With all his strength, Rice pierces through the chicken, delivering an attack using both his passive and active skills. The green-haired man is astonished by the scene. Rice can't believe he managed to do it. He almost collapses to the ground as he had thrown himself fully at the boss's weak point. Rice is surprised by what he gained from defeating the boss. The system informs him that he earned the achievement, Hunter of Unicorn Chickens, which required defeating the boss, Unicorn Chicken. Rice received an F-rank passive skill called the Strongest Chicken. Its effect is that during the night, from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m., his damage is increased by 15%, losing the effect outside of this time frame. Seeking runs toward Rice and says that was incredible. He didn't imagine Rice had combat skills. Rice, embarrassed, says it was just a lucky strike. Meanwhile, the people observing from outside point out that it was the guy with white and green hair who defeated the boss, and that's amazing. A pink-haired girl, watching from a distance, asks how they defeated the boss. She asks from afar what the boss's drops might have been. She is envious, saying she now wants to kill a boss too. She then decides to get closer, raising her hand and asking whoever defeated the boss to look back. She approaches, asking if the person responsible for defeating the boss is named Rice. She is pleased they are finally meeting. She says she saw a post from Rice at the Real Cafe, and she was looking for him. She also says she really wanted to find him, as she is a big fan. Rice, not understanding anything, asks what cafe, and what was written in that post. Apparently, the reviews about his chicken skewers are very popular. She starts walking closer to him and says she's not just there to eat the chicken skewers. She then grabs Rice's hand and, smiling, asks him if he would like to start a business with her. She also introduces herself, saying her name is Melina. With a sparkle in her eye, she says it's a restaurant business. She asks him to trust her so they can become partners. After that, we have a presentation of the game. Real is the first real-time virtual reality RPG. The game asks a hero to form an army to face the forces of evil. The game also informs that the prize is in money and will be awarded only to the strongest hero. The prize is nothing less than 100 billion won. The game's advertisement states that anyone can be a hero. They just need to strive to be the strongest. All they need to do is play real. The players are ecstatic about the scale of the game. At that moment, Seeking is preparing something. A meal is being prepared in a cauldron. Rice continues cutting some food. Seeking stops to think why it feels like he's at a part-time job. He wonders if he is really playing the real game at that exact moment. Seeking, along with the group, feels frustrated, imagining that they missed the opportunity to stop playing a long time ago. Melina continues helping, thinking that she is being rejected at that moment for being a stranger. But if she collaborates, she might change the group's opinion. She can only think about the reviews she saw about the chicken skewer and how much she wants to try them. She watches Rice and asks what he is doing. Rice seems to be holding some kind of nut in his hand. She sees him bringing the food to his mouth and thinks that Rice is really careful with what he cooks. At that moment, Rice makes a completely bizarre face and starts crying. Melina is startled and asks what happened, wondering if he ate something that bad. Melina grabs Rice's attention and asks why he chose that name since it means arroz, when translated from English to Portuguese. Rice replies that it's because he loves cooking, that's all. Rice observes a mushroom while Melina comments that she was just curious and asks if he uses this name in all other games as well. Rice responds that he has never played another game. She is surprised by this and asks if it's true that this is the first game he has ever played. Rice replies yes, and she thinks it's cool. Seeking says it makes sense that it's his first time since he has never seen anyone asking about hunting before. Seeking also mentions that he heard Rice is quite famous at the cafe. Apparently someone saved a video of Rice. The horned chicken was especially famous. Rice, still preparing his food, asks if he is referring to that giant unicorn chicken. Rice comments that unexpectedly, this real game has many timed functions. Rice imagines that he is 28 years old and a novice at this game. He tells his group that he tested some new sauces for seasoning. He also asked them to put mushrooms in the sauce. Seeking and Melina immediately respond that they will do so. They look at the cauldron and ask if they can just pour them in. Rice replies yes. Rice, looking at the cauldron, wonders if the good smell is because he is so close. As soon as Seeking and Melina put the mushrooms in the cauldron, the aroma rises instantly. Rice continues preparing the food, thinking he just needs to stir it for a while. Melina is already drooling, only able to think about how much she wants to eat right then. Rice opens his system and accesses his storage. He goes through his inventory and selects the chicken meat, imagining he will need it at that moment. The chicken meat is then summoned. Rice is surprised that it wasn't cold. He imagines this is probably due to the game's technology. Rice looks at Seeking and Melina and tells them it's time to fill their stomachs. The two, happy, say they will eat immediately. They look at the dish and say it looks extremely delicious. The system informs them that this is giant chicken meat with mushroom sauce. It increases ingestion satisfaction by 4 and boosts attack by 1 after eating. Everyone prepares their plates and thanks Rice for the delicious meal. Seeking takes the food to his mouth, wondering if it will taste less delicious than real food. Melina, also bringing the food to her mouth, is happy that she is finally eating food prepared by the famous chef, Rice. Seeking takes a bite. Melina does too. As they do, they feel as if they are teleported to another dimension. They start looking around, confused. At this moment, they observe pieces of chicken flying everywhere. They wonder if it's an aerial attack with all these chicken pieces flying around. They think the freshness of the meat is overwhelming. They look up and see a mushroom riding on a piece of chicken and ask what the heck is that. Seeking, scared, asks what that horrible mushroom is. The mushrooms mounted on the roasted chickens shout that Seeking cut them earlier, so they hope he is ready for battle. Seeking and Melina panic, saying they don't have a weapon at that moment. Seeking looks down and wonders what the heck is happening. They notice they are standing on a giant tongue and comment that at best, this is the world of flavors. The mushroom starts laughing and says that their taste buds won't favor them in that world. So what are they going to do about it? The two begin to fall from the sky, accompanied by the roasted chickens and mushrooms. Seeking and Melina start screaming at each other, not understanding what is happening. Melina then reaches out, shouting Seeking's name. He manages to grab her hand. They find themselves facing several giant unicorn chickens, even dressed in clothes. Seeking imagines all the giant chickens they have eaten up to that point. Suddenly they return to reality and look at Rice, who is taking food from the plate. Seeking and Melina are confused about what just happened. They think, honestly, there must be marijuana as a seasoning in this food to have such a trip like that. Rice looks at the two and asks if they liked the food. The two, with a sparkle in their eyes, say that the food is sensational. They had never eaten anything so delicious in their lives. Rice is surprised by this, but he notices something appearing in front of him. While still seated, he sees that the system says he has received the passive skill, Chef's Luck, an F-rank skill. There is a very low chance that more golden dishes or high-class food will be made again. The user will have an eclipse buff or a permanent stats effect. Rice is surprised by this, while Seeking and Melina congratulate him since they didn't know this could happen. Rice checks his status and sees his profession as chef. He has 120 health, 60 attack points, 15 agility points. His satiety is at 52 out of a maximum of 120. He has 15 defense points and 10 points in cooking. Night then falls. Seeking tells Rice that it's getting late and he needs to leave. Seeking asks if he wants to send a friend request and asks the same to Melina. She says she does. Rice says he also wants to since he is a beginner and friendships would be welcome. Seeking informs Rice that if he continues through the forest, he will find a city on the other side where he can do a lot of business. Rice is happy and thanks him for the information. Seeking then thanks him for the meal, and Melina says she will quickly level up to partner with Rice. Rice, feeling shy, says it's okay. Rice observes the trail and imagines that now he just needs to walk. He then closes his eyes and lifts his head, thinking how good the night air smells. He still thinks that even though it's just a game, it's very refreshing. He then lowers his head and looks at his status in the system again. He smiles, seeing that his profession there is chef. He looks up at the starry sky and imagines it has been a long journey to get there, so he can start over again. He then decides to leave the game, as it is already late. He starts to take off his headset and wonders how long he played. He then takes his phone and sees that it's almost 4 a.m. Looking at the phone screen, he thinks he wants to sleep at least 5 hours since the next day will be his first day at his part-time job. Rim then places the headset on the table and says he didn't even notice the time passing. He wonders if that's why people like games so much. Rim then turns to the other side and says he will try to sleep. He is restless for a while in bed. He is fiddling with his phone, thinking that he only has 4 hours to sleep, but he thinks he will sleep after reading a bit about Real online. He sees a topic asking if sending a video of the game Real is illegal. The video in question is of Rice fighting the boss. He finds that scene incredible and wonders if he really fought like that. He thinks that even though it's a video of him, it seems unique. Rim starts to see his character in the game and says he really has a beautiful appearance now that he sees it from the outside and wonders how other players see him. Rim wonders why there is only that one video saved. He remembers that ever since Seeking asked him to start recording, he is sure he recorded more videos. Rim feels down, thinking he is sure he saved a video of him cooking. Rim begins to fall asleep, thinking that next time he will try to save it. Before sleeping, he realizes that only highlight videos can be selected as saved demo videos. Rim realizes how bad this is. The next day, the players are in full swing fighting the horned chickens. One player faces the boss and tries to replicate the attack that Rim did on that giant chicken, but without success. The giant chicken stares at the player while he wonders if the player Rice really did it that way, because it apparently didn't work. The giant chicken gets angry and makes the player fly away. One of the players starts laughing, saying that the guy who flew away should have stabbed the boss with a toothpick and not a knife. The other person hearing this says, "That's not quite right." The person who went flying complains of pain and insists that they are sure Rice attacked that way. They start wondering who Rice is for the move to have worked only for him. At that moment, They hear someone shouting that the chicken skewers are costing 1,001. It was Melina, announcing the crispy chicken skewers for 1,001. She shouts that players need to hurry because only 50 skewers will be sold. She also announces that fried eggs will be sold for 301. Players grab the skewers in their hands. The man in red clothing asks, "What the heck is that? It looks like it wasn't cooked in the middle." The woman says hers is weird too, even though it looks fully cooked. The man says he doesn't want those strange skewers. They want Rice's skewers. Melina feels a bit embarrassed and apologizes, saying her skills are quite poor at the moment, so she will give those skewers for free. Melina clenches her fist and says that Rice looked so cool while cooking the chicken skewers, so she can't fall behind. She then starts shouting again, saying that a chicken skewer cost 1,001. She thinks she needs to catch up to Rice at all costs. At this moment, the system notifies Melina of an achievement. The achievement is, "Can you hear my voice?" Requirement: continuously shout for more than 5 hours. The reward is an F-rank megaphone skill. Melina just completed the achievement and received the reward. She looks at the skill and thinks it's incredible. The F-rank megaphone skill she just received is a passive skill. It has a maximum capacity of 10% and a local range increased by 1%. Melina is extremely happy and says that although the skill isn't related to combat or cooking, it's still a skill. She is happy since not many people in real have a skill, whatever it may be. The man who had bought the chicken skewer goes to buy another chicken, and again it is undercooked. He is frustrated by this. Melina, excited, continues to announce her chicken skewers, saying they are only 1,001. Meanwhile, in real life, Rim is cutting onions at his new job. The restaurant owner asks if he really knows how to use a knife a bit. He observes Rim's agility in cutting onions and says it seems he has a lot of experience. Apparently, Rim has good qualifications. The owner compliments him, saying he started very well. The restaurant chef watches Rim and wonders what's up with him. The chef thinks Rim is ridiculously pretentious and useless. After thinking this, he calls Rim's attention. Rim turns and asks how he can help. The chef asks who taught him to cut like that. The chef approaches Rim and asks if he thinks he's in some kind of competition to be cutting so fast. Rim apologizes if he made him uncomfortable. The chef points out that such speed is very pretentious. With that speed, it's impossible to maintain a consistent size. The chef says this but notices that the onion was perfectly cut, which he finds incredible. The chef acknowledges that the onions were well cut but still hates pretension. The chef asks Rim to fry some eggs for the next dish. He instructs Rim not to break the yolks for sunny side-up eggs and asks if he knows what that means. Rim responds that yes, he will keep that in mind when preparing them. Rim starts frying the eggs and thinks he doesn't even remember how many years it's been since he showed his cooking to someone. After all, it's his cooking that he can no longer taste or smell. Rim laments this and thinks that since he can't taste the food he's preparing due to his lack of taste, he will have to rely on his techniques. He watches the egg frying and thinks that in the game, real, he cooked for hours and wonders if he can call that cooking. He brings his hand to the lid and wonders if he will do well here too. He remembers when he cooked scrambled eggs for Mary, and she said they were delicious and couldn't wait to try them again. He covered the frying pan and then remembered Seeking and Melina after they had tasted his food, saying it was incredibly delicious. They had never tasted anything so good in their lives. The dish is ready, and the waitress takes the bibimbap to the table. The customers look at the dish and say it looks a bit different from other times. They ask if the restaurant's chef has changed. The waitress replies, "No, the chef is the same." They ask if she's sure because they always eat there and this dish is definitely different from usual. One of them scoops up the fried egg, saying it doesn't matter much since they are starving. He also notes that the yolk doesn't look as bright and runny as usual. He then takes a bite, thinking it must be his imagination. After tasting the fried egg, he is amazed by the taste. Manager Shin, who was the one who tasted the egg, says it's incredible. He asks the assistant to taste it too, as the bibimbap is sensational. The waitress asks why he is acting like that and if he tasted a rock. The chef hears the conversation from the kitchen and listens to the manager saying that it's not that. He just found the fried egg very good and wonders if this bibimbap is good. Then the other dishes must be great too. The chef doesn't like hearing these compliments since Rim was the one who prepared the dish. The assistant tastes the dish and says the bibimbap is really delicious and asks if it has always been this good because he doesn't remember. He also says that the fried egg is truly an art. He praises the lunch, saying it exceeded his expectations. Rim, in the kitchen, listens while the assistant says the egg white was extremely tender, and the way the yolk bursts is a masterpiece. Rim remembers people praising his dishes when he was Rice, People also loved his dish, saying how amazing it was. Rim feels happy and thinks that although he lost his senses, his experience and skills won't betray him. Rim is at the stove, thinking that his body can only taste inside the game, but even in real life, he can start over again. He says he will try again and fully trust the new experiences he has gained. The chef looks at him, not satisfied with this. Rim's shift finally ends, and he is relieved that it's time to go. It was his first day at his part-time job. Rim decides to wash his hands, thinking it has been a while since he last did this, so he isn't used to it. But he is happy that everything turned out well, since he apparently didn't make any mistakes. Rim then thanks his boss and says he will be leaving now that the shift is over. His boss says that's fine and thanks him for doing so well on his first day. Rim says it was nothing and that it was all thanks to his guidance. Rim starts walking through the restaurant toward the exit and then meets the waitress. She tells Rim that now the two of them will be working together, so he should say goodbye to her too. Rim agrees and thanks her for her help that day. She then asks if she can call him Appa. Rim replies that she can. She says he can talk more comfortably with her since she is younger than him. Rim laughs lightly and asks if that's okay. The waitress calls him Appa and says yes, and that he did very well that day. She also comments that he was so calm that it didn't seem like it was his first day of work. She asks him to be careful on his way home and hopes to see him tomorrow. Rim then heads to the door and says he'll see her tomorrow. After Rim leaves, the restaurant owner asks Mireille what she thinks of Rim. She replies that she thinks he is amazing and very fast with knives. The chef hears the entire conversation, while Mireille says that Rim didn't make any mistakes and is definitely different from the others. The restaurant owner then turns to Daewon and asks what he thought of Rim's first day. Daewon responds that Rim did fairly well, but they need to evaluate him further, as he thought Rim was quite inexperienced that day. The restaurant owner asks what he means by inexperienced. Daewon says that Rim isn't bad at cooking, but he could barely remember where the tools and other things are. The restaurant owner, not understanding, asks if that's not normal since it was Rim's first day getting to know the place, and it was only a part-time shift. Daewon gets frustrated and says that considering Rim has apparently worked in this field before, he should remember these things. The restaurant owner says he understands now. Mireille says that the fried egg from earlier looked delicious, and she would have liked to try it. Night falls. The restaurant continues operating after Rim has left. One of the customers calls the waitress, asking for a cider, an alcoholic drink. She, who was attending another customer, says she will be right there. Mireille happily carries the customer's dishes. At this moment, one of them asks when his spicy pork will arrive. She informs him that it's being prepared and will be ready in a minute. A couple is dining at the restaurant. The woman asks the man if he knows what that bracelet on the waitress's arm is. He replies that he has no idea. She says it's a Herc signature bracelet. The woman says that the bracelet probably costs around $1,000,001. They continue looking at the bracelet on Mireille's arm while the man asks if she's sure about that. He wonders why the bracelet is so expensive. Maybe because it contains gold. The woman responds yes, but the $1,000,001 price is for used bracelets. The new ones are much more expensive. The two continue observing the happy waitress, and the man asks the woman if she is sure about this because why would a waitress wear something so expensive to work? The woman replies that she is absolutely certain. After all, it bears the brand's signature, so there's no mistake. At that moment, the restaurant owner notices something wrong. He observes the customers and thinks that during lunch, all the customers were very excited about the bibimbap, saying it was extremely delicious. But now, at night, everyone is silent. He tries to understand what happened. The owner sits down, reflecting on what it could be. He thinks about the fact that the new employee, Rim, was the most involved in preparing the dish. After he left, the customers calmed down. The restaurant owner becomes increasingly thoughtful, wondering if Rim has some secret to making the dish so delicious. He continues thinking deeply about what it could be, and then has an idea. He wonders if it could be the sesame seeds. At that moment, Rim finally arrives home. He brought some groceries to prepare his dinner. Rim thinks it's been a while since he cooked at home. He looks at all the ingredients he bought and decides that now that he's working, he needs to return to a healthy routine, so he decides to cook for himself again. Rim then rolls up his sleeves and says he will start slowly by preparing the dishes he made in the game real. He will try making them once more. He then prepares 3 dishes at once. Rim picks up his chopsticks and says he will first taste the boiled zucchini. He brings the food to his mouth, wondering if he will be able to taste it as he did in the game real. He starts chewing the food slowly. Rim puts his hand on his head and tries hard to remember the taste, but with no success he gets frustrated, saying that unfortunately, he still can't taste anything. He then looks at all the dishes he prepared and thinks that he can't be disappointed. After all, there's no need to feel despondent. After all, he can already consider it a miracle that he can taste and cook inside the game real. Rim notices that the taste reminds him of gum when it loses its sweetness. Definitely, it's the worst hell for a chef. However, he imagines himself in the game and now feels hopeful. He imagines that within the game, it's as if he were truly living. Rim continues tasting his dishes, trying at all costs to taste something. However, only his in-game version ends up happy when eating anything. Rim keeps chewing his dinner. He eats everything, leaving nothing on the plates. Rim comments that he eats everything, even though it doesn't appear so. Rim, worried, imagines that it's the first time he has eaten everything since losing his senses and wonders if this will ever be cured. He thinks that one way or another, he needs to fill his stomach in any way possible. He looks at his headphones and wonders if he should enter the game again. He then takes the green liquid that comes with the game. He puts on his headphones, quickly lies down on the bed, and then begins to concentrate on the game. He spends some time playing real. He obtained a strong horn that increases his attack by 30. Rice imagines that he only worked making snacks, so he wanted to try making Western food. He notices some lizard monsters and wonders if he should try cooking with their meat, as he has never tried before. Rice activates his weak point skill and thinks this is a good chance to try. He then enters a battle with all those lizards at once, as he now has more battle experience. Rice thinks the fight can't get violent so as not to spoil the meat, so he needs to finish it quickly. Rice notes that the weak point is on the lizards' foreheads, and he will need to make them into pieces. Rice jumps, gathering power in his weapon, and then strikes the lizard's forehead, hitting its weak point. A man watching the fight asks if that person isn't Rice. The woman says yes, it's the guy who defeated the boss. They wonder why Rice would be fighting lizards. They comment that the baby red spider provides webs for the user to sell, while the rake lizard only gives a measly amount of money, so no one is interested in hunting them. The man gets stressed, imagining that Rice is inexperienced and apparently not as amazing as he thought. After all, who would waste time with lizards? Rice continues frantically killing the lizards. After all, he doesn't want to eat spiders. He wants to eat lizard meat. Rice finishes all the lizards, thus gaining some low-level magic stones and lizard meat. He notices this magic stone he had never seen before. If ingested, it gives 5 more attack points. If it's for defense, the magic stone gives 5 defense points when ingested. Rice is unsure of what it is, but apparently it's something he can ingest, so he decides to keep it. At this moment, he doesn't notice something approaching him. The system notifies him of a talent achievement with the name Feat Achieved. Is this person a layer? Rice reads this and asks what it means. Rice looks back and notices something approaching him. It was a huge spider with flowers on its head. The spider asks Rice not to be scared. Even though she asks this, Rice is very startled. He asks how he wouldn't be scared in a situation like this. The spider looks closely at Rice and says she is the queen of that forest and has a request for him. The talent achievement that had appeared for Rice had the requirement of killing 100 rake lizards and not killing any baby red spiders. Since Rice did this, he was rewarded with a secret mission from the Red Spider Queen. Rice is confused by all this. He wonders what secret mission this is. After all, what should he do at that moment? Maybe just stand still? He then looks at the spider and notices that standing still did nothing. He looks at the spider's hairy body and praises the developers of the real game for doing a good job making her disgusting. The Spider Queen asks if he will stand still. She asks if Rice is an ally or something like that. Rice still doesn't understand anything. At this moment, a man watches from afar and wonders what Rice is doing. The man observes better and says he has never seen that spider appearing in front of any player. He imagines it must be a mission. The man thinks that Rice receiving this mission is surprising since it's not common. After all, understanding the requirements for missions to appear is very difficult. Besides, there are various rarities like professional, secret, rare, epic, etc. This increases the rivalry among users. The man then, little by little, gets closer to Rice. He is pensive, wondering what the mission might be and if he should try to approach. The man gets closer and closer, imagining that the mission involves spiders, and he hates spiders. Rice notices the man approaching and realizes he has never seen him before. The man greets Rice and says that the spider caught his attention, which is why he is there. At that moment, a huge drop of blood falls to the ground. It was from the man who approached. The spider immediately stabbed its leg into his chest. The man dies and starts to disappear from the game. He wonders why he was suddenly struck. The man then disappears, leaving only his boots behind. Rice asks what the hell just happened. He looks at the boots and sees they are made with lizard leather and red spider threads. Rice notes that apparently you can create boots in the game, and that guy created these. The boots in question give 7 agility points. Someone watches Rice with binoculars and says he got a very good item since it was created by a player rather than being from a shop. The other man comments that Rice has good manners, so he doesn't know if he will pick up the boots on the ground. The man with the binoculars says that even with good manners it's fine. After all, it's an item dropped on the ground. The man with the binoculars looks again, and Rice already has the boots on his feet. He asks if this person didn't have good manners, but he's all happy with someone else's boots. The queen then asks one last time if Rice is an ally or not. Rice didn't know it was something he needed to answer, and then replies that yes, he is an ally. The Spider Queen then explains that she and her babies lived in harmony until a group of rake lizards appeared and started eating her babies. The queen also says that the princess lost the race and must have led the group of lizards to a place not far from the forest. And as long as the princess lives, the spider's babies will continue to suffer. The Spider Queen further comments that eventually, the lizards will expel the spiders from the forest, so if Rice is truly an ally, he must kill the lizard princess. Rice says he understands the situation and imagines that he is apparently forming an alliance with a spider. The system notifies him that the mission is to kill the lizard princess somewhere in the forest. The reward will be a new skill besides a hidden achievement. The Spider Queen then says she will be waiting for Rice to successfully complete this mission. Rice is curious about this secret quest and informs the spider that he will take a look around the forest. Rice bids farewell to the spider, and the only thing he can think of is that he is hungry. Rice starts preparing a lizard skewer and thinks he tried something like this only in Vietnam. Suddenly something catches his attention, shining in front of him. The system notifies him that Rice has gained a passive skill called Chef's Luck. Any food made above the delicious rating will have a small chance of giving a temporary buff. Rice looks at his glowing hand and wonders what that could be. He imagines he must have gained a new skill from cooking so much. Now he thinks he should cook even more. The delicious rake lizard skewer is finally ready. It increases satiety by 20 and defense by 1. Rice imagines that if he eats that skewer, his abilities will increase, and he finds this mechanic interesting within the real game. Rice then takes the skewer in his hand, calmly brings it to his mouth, and starts chewing slowly since he has never tasted it before. And then he widens his eyes, surprised by the taste. He was surprised because he imagined the taste would moderately resemble samgyeopsal. Tears of joy flow from Rice's eyes as he imagines it is sensational. It's the exact taste of grilled lizard with nuoc sauce from Vietnam. Rice is happy because even the dry taste at the end is the same. The system notifies that the lizard skewer gave Rice a temporary buff, increasing his defense and energy. Rice looks up and sees the increase in his attributes after eating the skewer and finds it interesting. Rice begins to imagine that even as a cook, he can also enhance his abilities. Rice smiles and imagines that the more he understands about the game real, the more greedy he becomes. Rice starts stretching and says he should hunt to complete the spider's mission. He then starts hunting the rake lizards nearby. He immediately finishes off one of them, but there are several lizards in that region. Rice keeps his weak point skill active all the time, observing his surroundings. He then turns and notices one of the lizards. This lizard is furious, charging at Rice. Rice doesn't waste any time and quickly finishes off that lizard with his giant chicken horn. At that moment, more rake lizards approach Rice. He looks at them and comments that apparently there are quite a few of them that day. Rice is startled to realize that all the lizards were attacking at the same time. He charges energy into his weapon and thinks that he can't do much, since he didn't plan to fight that way. With a single powerful attack, he finishes off all the lizards at once. Rice is pleased because he seems to be getting very good at hunting. A blonde woman is watching Rice through the system. She enjoys seeing how well he is doing. The blonde woman then smiles and is eager to see more. Rice is eating his skewers and feels like he heard a laugh, but has no idea what it could be. Rice continues eating his skewers even with several rake lizards approaching him. With each bite he takes, he says it tastes even better. The lizards jump at Rice. The lizard is worried because Rice shows no fear. Rice simply says that their meat is delicious. Rice gives a huge smile and says he should definitely make more skewers out of them. His hunger is at 20% at that moment. Rice defeated all the lizards that were there, but he can only think about being hungry. At this moment, a red spider slowly approaches Rice. He notices her arrival. The red spider then produces a web ball called Best Sticky Spider Web and gives it to Rice. Rice takes the web in his hand and asks if it's really for him. The spider runs away and he thanks her for it. The system notifies that the red spider web is extremely resistant and can be used to make various items. Rice wonders if the spider gave him the web as a thank you for hunting the rake lizards. Rice then puts the web in his inventory, thinking that it shouldn't be a problem for him to keep it. The day goes by. Rice is preparing another rake lizard skewer. He keeps singing while the skewer is cooking. He earns more mana stones and also gains a new achievement, unlocking the title Rake Lizard Exterminator for eliminating 200 rake lizards. Rice unlocks another achievement, a ferocious appetite, for consuming 100 identical meals. The achievement increased his maximum hunger by 100. His weak point skill increased to rank E. His optimized skills improve by 25% in an instant attack. 40 hunger points are consumed. A person watches Rice from a distance. It was the man who was killed by the Spider Queen. The man says he finally found Rice. The man approaches Rice asking for permission. Rice greets him as well. Rice notices it's the same man from before. Rice quickly says that he is probably there for the boots and explains that he only tried them on but was going to return them. The man explains that it wasn't that since it's just an attributed item and Rice could actually keep those boots. Rice is confused and asks what an attributed item means. Does it mean that only one person can use it? The man explains that he died for nothing and that it was costly to do so since he needs to hunt and gather materials to make them again. The man looks dejected while Rice apologizes and asks what items he will be looking for. The man asks if Rice is referring to all the necessary materials. Rice says yes. After all, it was his fault. The man finds it strange that Rice is being so nice and asks if he simply wants to give the materials. Rice summons the items from his inventory, saying he has lizard leather, spider web, a lot of meat, and spices. The man notices the spider web and asks if it's the best sticky spider web by name. Rice responds that it is and asks why. The man says it's the best possible material and asks if Rice doesn't know that. Rice says he thought all webs were the same. The man asks who he really is because it seems like something is off. Rice just says that real is his first game. The man takes the web from Rice's hand and says he really seems like a noob and decides to accept the web. Rice asks the man if that item isn't too strong. The man replies that it is, as every game is based on rarities. The man also asks if Rice is doing the Lizard Princess mission. Rice replies that he is. Rice even imagines how she might taste. He also thinks he should change his items since he's using beginner gear. The man remains silent, so Rice suspects it's true that his equipment is bad. Apparently, even there, you can't survive with bad items. The man cracks his neck and says he will change that situation now. He grabs a lizard skin, takes out a needle and thread, and starts sewing the skin. Rice is amazed to see that. Rice, surprised, says it's been a while since he saw someone so focused, and he imagines he can't just sit and watch. Rice sits next to the man who is sewing. He prepares to help too. Rice grabs some rake lizard bodies and frantically starts making something with that leather and meat. The man keeps sewing a boot at full speed. The progress is already at 28%. A man with purple hair asks if that person is Rice. The man with green hair says yes, and that there's someone next to him they've never seen. Rice and the man are working at full speed on their tasks. The people watching say that the man is definitely not just a helper. The man finally finishes making 2 pairs of boots and a spider web trap. The man asks what Rice was doing during that time. Rice says it's called dismemberment. The man says he understands and asks Rice to see the result. He puts on the boot he made and says that using good materials gives great results, as the boot gives 10 agility, 5 attack, and 5 defense. The man happily gives something to Rice and says it's a present. Rice looks at the present, and the system notifies him that it's a very sticky net that paralyzes enemies of up to 2 stars for 10 seconds. The man cracks his neck again and asks Rice what he thinks of the present. Rice, happy, thanks him, saying that item will be very useful against a boss. The man wishes him good luck against the Lizard Princess and says he will disconnect to sleep. Rice says that's fine. The man starts to disappear from the game, saying he already added him, and they will see each other later. Rice shouts for him to wait, but it's too late. Rice feels embarrassed because he didn't even ask the man's name, so he needs to ask later. Rice becomes thoughtful and imagines he should complete the quest quickly. He starts walking through the forest. Suddenly he encounters a giant lizard. Rice imagines that he finally found the Lizard Princess, so he just needs to defeat her. The Lizard Princess stares at him intently. At that moment, 2 enormous lizards jump at Rice. He didn't expect there to be more lizards there. Rice prepares for combat, imagining that he will have to defeat those 2 as well. Rice jumps at the chief lizards, thinking he needs to be very careful. At this point, Rice's only concern is not spoiling their meat. Rice goes all out and activates his weak point skill. He hits one of the lizards dead on. Despite bleeding heavily, the lizard remains standing. Rice, surprised, looks at it and asks why it didn't die even though it was a fatal blow. The lizard quickly hits Rice with its tail, sending him flying. Rice is thrown into the air and becomes worried because this is completely different from the unicorn chicken, and these aren't even the bosses yet. The giant lizard just laughs, watching Rice fly away and causing an explosion where he landed. Severely injured, Rice realizes he can't rely solely on his current abilities, because in his current state, he won't be able to win. Rice recalls that he needed help even against the unicorn chicken, and now he has to deal with a stronger opponent alone. Rice looks at the lizards and thinks they are just ingredients. He focuses on the lizard princess and realizes he needs to use something. He decides to use the mana stones. He bites into the mana stones he has with him. The system notifies that one stone gave him 5 attack points and the other stone gave him 5 defense points. He grabs his weapon and feels his body getting stronger with these buffs. He immediately starts running toward the giant lizards. He quickly activates his weak point skill. He also activates his focus to strengthen the tip of his weapon. The weapon passes by the lizard's head, which the lizard notices. The attack hits the lizard's tail squarely. The monster quickly turns and tries to bite Rice. Rice swiftly hits its forehead, where the weak point is. The attack is strong enough to pierce it. The lizard princess watches from afar, hearing the other lizard's cries. She then stares at Rice as if furious. Rice is exhausted after defeating the 2 giant lizards. The system notifies that the lizard princess has recognized Rice as an enemy. Rice then thinks that the princess will finally attack. The lizard princess lets out a loud roar, causing the dead lizards to start rising. Rice shields himself from the strong wind and asks what the hell is happening. Rice wonders why the lizards have revived and turned white. He starts attacking them with all his strength. He keeps attacking as best he can. At that moment, the lizard princess leaps. She quickly strikes at Rice, who barely dodges. Rice falls to the ground, extremely scared. There was no one nearby in the forest to help Rice. He sees the 2 lizards coming towards him. Rice continues attacking with all his strength. His HP is very low at that moment. He then hears something behind him and turns. He notices the lizard princess shedding her skin. The system notifies that she is entering her second form. Rice looks up, worried, and thinks that this second form will be a problem, especially since his HP is low. He then remembers the sticky web he got from the man earlier. He thinks he should use that web Ether made to paralyze the boss for 10 seconds. The lizard princess quickly charges at Rice. Without wasting time, he throws the web at the boss, praying it will work. The web hits the lizard princess squarely. Rice gathers energy in his weapon and says he needs to attack now. He strikes with all his might at the lizard princess's head. The lizard princess opens her eyes and immediately moves her paw, hitting Rice and throwing him away. Rice flies far and crashes hard into the ground. The lizard princess notices that the web is expanding. The web then forces the lizard princess's body against the ground, paralyzing her for the next 7 seconds. Severely injured, Rice realizes he needs to do something quickly since his HP is very low. He looks at the lizard princess and says that in 7 seconds, the paralysis will end, but he doesn't have the strength to defend himself when she attacks. At that moment, night falls, and the system notifies that the unicorn chicken buff will take effect due to the time of day. Rice gains 15 more attack points until dawn. Rice exclaims that he had forgotten about the ability he gained from defeating the unicorn chicken boss. Rice becomes excited because a light has appeared at the end of the tunnel. He starts running at full speed towards the lizard princess. The lizard princess just watches, still under the web's effect. Rice uses all his remaining strength to activate his focus point skill directly on the lizard princess's weak spot. Rice's eyes shone brightly as he shouted out his focus point skill. Meanwhile, the lizard princess couldn't react due to the paralysis. Rice slashed through the princess. The system immediately notified him that he had killed the lizard princess. Severely weakened, Rice couldn't believe he had actually succeeded. He watched her body disappear, and the system notified him that he had unlocked the achievement Lizard's Nightmare, which required killing the lizard princess for the first time. Rice received an F-rank skill called Lizard's Power, a passive ability that allows the user to climb up to 20 meters. Many people who were hiding and watching couldn't believe that Rice, who was just a cook until now, had killed a boss that even the 5 of them couldn't defeat. The system also notified him that the lizard princess's body had turned into a quest item. Rice didn't understand, wondering what he should do with it. He raised the web and asked if he should give it to the Spider Queen. At that moment, he heard a voice saying there was no need for that. He quickly turned to see who had spoken. It was the Spider Queen, accompanied by several baby spiders. She said there was no need since she was there. The Spider Queen announced that the revenge was complete and that her people would no longer suffer. All the people hiding were shocked to see such a large spider and wondered if it was a linked mission. Rice told the Spider Queen that it was his first mission, so he didn't know if everything went right. The Queen responded that he did splendidly and that now the existence of the lizards would gradually diminish. Rice remarked that this meant there would be fewer lizards for the players to hunt, so he wasn't sure if that was really a good thing. The Spider Queen explained that the Lizard Princess would return again since their battle never ends. She also mentioned that before that happens, they would show their power. As she said this, a large army of red spiders began to march. The spiders spotted some nearby lizards and quickly defeated them. Rice watched the spiders kill the lizards and asked if this wouldn't affect the system, since there might not be any lizards left to hunt. The Spider Queen simply said that Rice had worked hard, and now he would receive a reward. Rice's body began to glow, which he found amazing. The real game informed him that, thanks to his efforts, peace had come to the forest for a time until a new lizard princess emerged. The system notified Rice that he had earned the skill F-Rank Poison Pouch for completing the secret mission. Additionally, the system also notified him that he had unlocked the achievement Guardian of the Spiders for completing the Spider Queen's revenge. The reward was a 10-point increase in all stats. Rice was amazed as his hand glowed purple while reading that the skill he earned allowed his body to produce a poison that paralyzes any enemy with less than 2 stars for 3 seconds. The target would feel nausea. The system also notified him that he had unlocked the achievement Pioneer of a Scenario, where a player needs to complete a scenario directly related to the main story. The reward was the profession Pioneer. Rice found it incredible that suddenly many notifications appeared, and he now had the profession of a pioneer. The people who had been hiding came to congratulate Rice for defeating a boss alone. Rice was startled to see so many people surrounding him and said it was just luck. People wanted to buy something from him, and he just asked for some time to prepare things. Rice announced that to celebrate, he would sell the lizard meat at half price. People from various regions began to gather to try the dish prepared by Rice. While preparing the food, Rice said it was nice to have so many people there, but it was very hot standing in front of the fire, and it had been a while since he did this. Someone approached and handed him a cloth, asking him to wipe his sweat with it. Rice thanked them and then turned around. He noticed it was Melina and asked what she was doing there. She replied that she had just used the Find Friend function to locate Rice. Rice is surprised to learn that such a feature exists. Melina says she heard about his achievements and congratulates him. They continue talking through the night. Melina comments that Rice seems to be getting used to things. Rice agrees and asks if she wants to eat something. She says she wants to eat what he's preparing and also help him with her new skill. Rice thinks it's amazing but isn't sure if he'll need it. They look around and see so many people present that they are fighting to stay in line. Melina asks Rice to wait a moment. She takes a deep breath and then yells loudly using her skill, asking everyone to please stay in line. People are startled by the powerful wind that blew towards them. Melina yells that they will sell until the ingredients run out so they can wait patiently. Melina smiles and asks everyone to please wait calmly. The night becomes calmer as everyone decides to respect the line. Time passes and only one piece of meat remains. Rice thanks her for her help. She says she has done this many times, so it's no problem. Rice says that the last piece is hers and asks how she would like it cooked. She happily requests it well done, please. At that moment, someone approaches them. The person asks if it's Rice there. He comes closer and asks if there is any lizard steak left and if he can order one. Rice replies that there isn't any more. The man comments that apparently there is still one on the grill. Melina quickly grabs the meat and throws it into her mouth so as not to lose the piece. Rice is startled and tells her not to do that, or she will burn herself. The man runs his hand through his hair and says that it seems the lady has already reserved the steak. He asks for anything since he was there to try something from Rice. Rice shows him a leftover chicken skewer. The man says that will do. The man is happy and says he will finally taste Rice's food and thanks him for the meal. However, internally, the man thinks that he is also a chef and is there to learn about the food, imagining it can't be anything special. The man says that in the community, all anyone talks about is rice, 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 but apparently this rice is nothing special. The man starts eating the chicken skewer, thinking there's no way Rice's character is better than his. The man continues chewing calmly. Then he is shocked to notice something. His eyes start trembling. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Internally, he begins to scream, "How is it possible for this chicken skewer to taste like that?" He feels as if the chicken skewer is hitting his body and says it's incredibly delicious. He starts drooling and admits that it tastes amazing. Time passes, and Rice has logged out of the game and gone to his new job. The restaurant's chef is impatient. He wonders who this Rice is, and apparently isn't an ordinary guy. It turns out this chef is the blonde man who went to taste Rice's dish in the game. Rim is also in the restaurant, and all the chef can think about is how Rice's dish is different. The chef wonders if this Rice is an experienced chef, maybe a famous one seen on TV. The chef recalls his encounter with Rice in the game after tasting the dish. Rice asks if he is feeling all right. Melina can't believe he fainted because the dish was so good. Melina asks him to stop exaggerating. The blonde man, who calls himself the king of Korean cuisine, is enamored with Rice's dish, asking how it was grilled so perfectly. He was amazed and asks Rice how he managed to make it that way. He also says he would love to learn that secret recipe. Rice is just speechless. The blonde man says he actually works in a restaurant and that his name is the king of Korean cuisine. He says the place he works at is famous on Instagram. The blonde man says Rice seems to work in a restaurant too, so as fellow chefs, they should exchange tips. Rice says he didn't do anything special, just followed the basic grilling recipe. The man can't believe it. Smiling, he says he understands. After all, not just anyone would reveal their secret recipes to someone they don't know. The blonde man says that at least he tasted some salt on the chicken skewer, so he must have used that at least. Rice responds that the man asks if he used any paid item. The protagonist looks at the man and says he doesn't use any of that and just needs to look a little more towards the horizon. The man is confused. Daewon, the blonde man, asks what Rice means by that. The protagonist says that he needs to look at the small things. He cites a salt beetle as an example of what it means to look closely. Daewon, still not understanding, says he understands that Rice doesn't want to reveal his secrets on the first day they meet. Melina gets frustrated and asks if the so-called king of the Korean kitchen is a beggar, because so far he wants everything for free. Daewon stares at Melina and then becomes amazed, finding her very cute. He imagines that even though she's a character, she's probably beautiful in person, despite him already having a girlfriend. Daewon apologizes if he exaggerated and asks her to add him as a friend. She just gets more and more stressed. The protagonist becomes increasingly tired of all the noise. Melina yells at Daewon, telling him to apologize to Rice. He ironically says he did that a long time ago. Rice says he's done cleaning everything up and will leave since he has work the next day. Melina thanks him for the meal. He then says goodbye, thanking her for her help. Melina decides she will leave since Rice is leaving. Daewon panics, asking if the two are friends in real life and requests to add them. However, at that moment, both Rice and Melina disconnect from the game. The man is disappointed that he ended up alone. Back in the present, in real life, Daewon is frustrated, thinking he won't be able to find Rice or Melina again. Miri continues to watch the chef and wonders if he has any problems. At that moment, a person with a chic appearance arrives at the restaurant. Miri quickly attends to him. The man, whose name is Myung, orders the bibimbap dish. Miri says it will be ready shortly. He starts observing around and imagines he has been there before. Myung observes the employees and notices that the owner is not present that day and also realizes that the rude chef is just idling around. He informs the waitress that he wants his bibimbap hard. He says this and thinks that the place has become famous, but he is still not satisfied. The waitress yells to the kitchen to make a hard bibimbap. The chef, holding his cell phone, gets stressed and calls his assistant's attention. He looks at Rim and orders him to make the bibimbap. Rim asks if he wasn't supposed to do it only in the chef's absence. The chef says he is in charge and the assistant must obey. He also asks how Rim survived in the army with all that laziness. Rim apologizes, and Miri continues to hear the entire conversation between the two. She gets furious, saying that the chef has been extremely arrogant lately. Myung finally receives his bibimbap. He observes that the egg is incredible, but the rest doesn't look special. He stares at the dish, saying he traveled all over Korea in search of the perfect dish, and now he will taste if this is the place. He takes a portion with the spoon and imagines he should taste it. He calmly brings it to his mouth. He puts it in his mouth, imagining what the taste will be. As he chews, Myung finds the texture incredible, and the taste is sensational. For him, the yolk was perfect, as well as the rice, the amount of oil, and even the seasonings. He is amazed, imagining it can't be the same dish he had the other day. His mind is blown with emotion, thinking about how sensational that dish was. He continues eating the delicious bibimbap. With each bite, he becomes more and more amazed. His imagination runs wild, thinking he could easily eat that dish every day without getting tired of it. Myung just imagines it was an honor to eat such a delicious dish. For him, it was definitely a feast of flavors. He catches the waitress's attention and says he would like to ask a question. She turns around, and he asks if the chef has changed. Mireille responds that he hasn't, and asks if there is something wrong with the food. Myung responds that it's not that. He has eaten there before, but the taste that day was different. The waitress says he has changed too, apparently. He looks at Mireille and asks what she means by too. The waitress replies that this bibimbap has been receiving many compliments. She then approaches him to speak quietly and says that the dish was prepared by the assistant, not the chef. Myung is surprised, wondering if an assistant could make such a good dish. He looks at Rim, the assistant, and imagines that even though he doesn't know much about cooking, he has eaten many bibimbap, and that one was definitely at a professional level. Still looking at Rim, Myung asks why, with such skills, he is just an assistant, and why he works in a place like that. Myung finally finishes his dish and goes to pay the bill. He tells her the dish was delicious, and that he never imagined it was prepared by the assistant. She is grateful for the compliments. He also says that the dish was definitely the definition of perfection. At that moment, he looks to the side and sees Rim working. Myung approaches the waitress and asks if he can talk to the assistant chef for a moment. She says there is no problem. Mireille calls Rim's attention, saying that a customer wants to talk to him. He wonders what it could be. The customer apologizes for the inconvenience and asks if he really prepared the dish. Rim responds that he did. Myung says he was surprised by such culinary skills. Rim is surprised to hear that. The customer says it was definitely the best bibimbap he has ever eaten. Rim continues to be surprised as Myung tells him that he had eaten bibimbap from that restaurant before, but the dish prepared by Rim was sensational. Myung then hands him a business card, and Rim asks what it is. The customer, looking at Rim, says that his skills are not those of a mere assistant, and that if he needs any help, he should call him with the number on the card. Rim thanks him for the kindness. Myung starts to leave the restaurant while telling Rim that if he wants to become a real chef, he should call him, and he will arrange a position that suits him. Myung leaves, but before he goes, he says they will meet again. Rim is surprised by all of this, as are the waitresses. The protagonist looks at the card, wondering what kind of person Myung is. He looks at the card and sees that Myung has a restaurant called Myung Restaurant. The chef notices that Rim is out of the kitchen and gets angry, asking how he could leave without permission. Rim apologizes and says a customer called him. The chef says that doesn't matter since a customer has no authority. Rim just apologizes. The chef continues scolding him, and the protagonist just keeps apologizing with his head down. Mireille looks at Rim and tells the chef that a customer really called him. Daewon says he doesn't care about that. He then gets closer to Rim and starts pointing his finger at him, saying that this isn't an amusement park to do whatever he wants. The protagonist apologizes again and says he will keep that in mind. Daewon, still pointing his finger at the protagonist's face, says he doesn't care about his life, and not to underestimate that place just because it's small. The chef, still arrogant, says he is the king there, and that if he talks to the owner, Rim will be fired quickly. The waitress asks him to calm down since all Rim did was attend to a customer who called him. Daewon says it's a professional restaurant, so that's no excuse. Mireille says that she called Rim, so they can fire her instead. Rim is already downcast, listening to all of this. Daewon tells Mireille that she is too emotional and asks if she likes Rim by any chance. She replies, asking what that has to do with what happened. The argument continues for a long time until Rim calls the chef's attention. Both Daewon and Mireille look at him. Rim then bows and says he was wrong, and that from that day on, he won't leave the kitchen empty. So he asks for forgiveness. Still bowing, he apologizes again. Time passes, and the sun is almost setting. Rim continues walking through the city after leaving the restaurant. He hears people around him discussing what they will have for dinner. Rim becomes thoughtful. He looks at his reflection in the glass and wonders how long he will have to wait for something good to happen. The protagonist, lost in thought, imagines that his dream used to be opening a restaurant, but now that seems impossible. He finally arrives at his house. Rim grabs a drink and sits down. At that moment, he recalls conversations he had, hearing the doctor say that he has temporarily lost his sense of taste. He also remembers the chef saying that he doesn't care what Rim does, and that if he continues with his antics, the owner will fire him. The protagonist also recalls Myung saying that if Rim wants to be a real chef, he should call him. Rim holds his glass, imagining the client saying they will meet again. Many things run through his mind at that moment. He closes his eyes and thinks he's an idiot for dreaming about things he cannot achieve. Rim decides to play a game. The system welcomes Rice as he teleports in front of a large forest. The first thing he notices is the smell of the greenery. He looks at the trees and thinks it's much better to see one in the game than in real life. He takes a deep breath and says the feeling is very nice. He touches a tree and remembers he has a new skill to test. He recalls that this passive skill allows him to climb up to 20 meters. Rice begins to climb the tree with extreme ease and imagines this is how the skill works. He places his feet on the tree and thinks it's quite similar to Spider-Man. He thinks it's crazy, but he's in a game. He then lets go of the tree with his hands and stands on the tree. He is filled with happiness since the skill continued to work even without his hands. He starts climbing the tree just by walking and finds it amazing. He climbs up to the top of the tree. He notices he's getting close as he sees the ends of the leaves. Upon fully climbing the tree, he finds himself facing an incredible view with the sun setting. He looks at the sun and says it's very beautiful. Rice finds it all amazing, thinking it looks as real as reality itself. He continues gazing at the sky and imagines wanting to stay there for a long time. Seeing that beautiful view, he imagines that everything there seems more real than everything else. The day passes, and the protagonist returns to his work. He is already cooking with the pots on the stove. He continues chopping onions frantically. Rim is very focused after the previous day's confusion. Rim and the waitress are working in the kitchen. They hear the owner arrive at the restaurant, saying he's very hungry and asking for something to eat. The owner, all cheerful, says he wants a bowl of bibimbap since it's been a long time since he had one. He looks at the cook and asks for a bowl since there are no customers at the moment. Daewon says he can't because the ingredients are still being prepared. The owner approaches, saying it will be quick. Daewon responds that he can't because he's busy. The restaurant owner asks with what, since Daewon is always on his cell phone. Rim continues to listen to the entire conversation between the two, with the owner wanting to eat and the kitchen chef not wanting to cook. Daewon gets stressed and says that in the kitchen he is the chef, so he has the highest authority, and he says not to waste ingredients in such a way. The owner asks how it's a waste if the owner himself is asking. Daewon responds that it doesn't matter since there will be no profit from it. The chef says that if he wants to eat, he should prepare it himself. The owner then points his finger at Rim and asks him to prepare the dish. The owner says this with a smile on his face, and the protagonist responds that he will do it immediately. The chef is furious, hearing that conversation, as the owner is mocking, saying that at least one person there is polite. Rim informs that the bibimbap is ready. The owner thanks him and says it was very fast. The restaurant owner imagines that the appearance of the dish is very good and thinks it might be because he is very hungry. He takes a spoonful to his mouth. Upon tasting it, he is speechless at how good the dish is. He immediately turns around after tasting the bibimbap. The restaurant owner just looks at Rim without saying anything. He then looks back at the dish, still speechless. At this moment, the chef is smoking. The restaurant owner approaches and asks if the chef could let the assistant be in charge of preparing all the bibimbap from now on. The cook asks if that's what he wanted to talk about, whether it's about the preparation of the bibimbap. The owner nods, saying it's not just that. He also wants the chef to teach Rim how to prepare other dishes since his skills are uncommon. Daewon asks what's wrong, since all the food is there. The owner replies that, although he isn't a master chef, he is still the owner of the restaurant, and comments that the assistant has won several awards, and his food is extremely delicious. Daewon starts trembling with anger as he hears the restaurant owner say that it's a waste to keep Rim just as an assistant with all the skills he has. The owner calmly says that Rim has the potential to be at least the sous chef. Daewon can't believe what he's hearing. The furious chef asks if the owner really thinks Rim deserves to be the sous chef. The owner looks at the cigarette on the ground and asks if he said something wrong. Daewon steps on the cigarette and says that the owner only tasted the dish once and already wants to make the assistant a chef. The chef returns to the kitchen and soon sees Rim preparing something. Daewon grabs some gloves hanging there and throws them at Rim's back. Rim turns around and asks what happened. Daewon tells Rim that he ordered him to use rubber gloves and not to leave them in the sink, otherwise they would just get moldy. Rim apologizes, and Daewon keeps calling him a punk, saying he's gone too far these days. Mireille keeps listening to the entire argument. Daewon mocks, saying Rim will indeed win an award since he will give him a cooking course. The chef asks if Rim knows what skills are needed in the kitchen. A successful professional needs to manage time and experience. Rim starts to lose patience, being scolded for no reason. Daewon adds that skills don't matter in this world. Rim, even more impatient, calls the chef's attention. He turns and says things don't work that way. The chef gets angry and asks if Rim has gone crazy. Rim says that's not the case, but asks for some respect. Besides, he can't believe he heard that skills aren't needed to be a chef. Rim turns and says that the basic requirement for a chef is his skills, and that's an absolute truth. Daewon becomes extremely furious, calling Rim a punk and starts yelling, saying Rim doesn't understand anything and still wants to interfere. Mirai asks him to calm down since he's out of control. Rim says he has endured for a long time, and it's hard to respect a chef with such a bad personality. Mirai pleads for them to stop fighting, but Daewon ignores her. The chef starts shouting that he is the absolute chef of that kitchen and won't tolerate anyone talking back to him. Rim begins to think that he won't give up on his expectations because of a piece of trash like that chef. He remembers the chef's useless inferiority complex. Rim starts taking off his apron and says he won't tolerate it anymore since he shouldn't stay where he's no longer wanted. He throws the apron on the table and thanks for the good work he's had so far but says he's quitting. Mirai and Daewon can't believe it. The waitress begs him to come back while Daewon keeps calling him a punk and orders him to return. The chef is extremely furious and tells Rim to disappear, as he has only been a hindrance since he arrived in that kitchen. The restaurant owner arrives at that moment, not understanding what was happening. Rim continues walking out of the restaurant. He keeps walking, thinking he promised himself he would endure any circumstance. The protagonist still thinks he can endure everything, but he will never throw away his pride in cooking. He then sits on a bench, contemplating life deeply. Rim thinks he's reached a point where he thought it would be better to die, imagining he wasn't capable enough. The protagonist begins to think that maybe Daewon is right since Rim can't even be a good assistant, so how could he find his place in the kitchen? He starts to feel restless, rubbing his hands and lamenting that he couldn't hold on after so many insults at that restaurant. He walks with his head down, and someone approaches him at that moment. It was Myung, asking if Rim still remembers him. Rim replies that he does. The sky is clear at that moment, and Myung says he followed him after seeing him leave the restaurant and asks if everything is okay. Rim replies that it is and thanks him for asking. The protagonist, rubbing his hands, just mentions that he had a disagreement with the chef. Rim decides to ask why Myung is there. Myung responds that he wants Rim to work at his restaurant as a real chef. Rim is surprised by this and asks what that means. Myung says that basically, he owns the restaurant on the card, and he wants to hire him to test his skills a bit. Rim looks down and says his skills aren't that good. Myung asks him not to be modest. After all, he is good. Myung takes the opportunity to ask about the argument with the former chef. Rim comments that it wasn't really an argument, but rather that they had unfinished business. Myung sits next to Rim, and Rim just says that his direction and the chef's direction at that restaurant were different. The protagonist puts his hands on his legs and says that just because he tries hard doesn't mean others will like him, apparently. Myung says it's sad to see that lack of ambition and says that no matter what happened, it's in the past. So Rim should think about the future now. Myung explains that he has done many things over the past 70 years, and after all that, he recently felt like opening a restaurant. Rim listens to Myung tell that story. Myung says the restaurant is new and was recently completed, so it's still empty and lifeless. That's why he wants to hire young people. Rim decides to share what happened to him. He explains that he used to be a chef. However, after an accident, he can't taste or smell anything. He feels very sad as he tells this, and says that if Myung really wants him, he will have to deal with a disabled person. Myung listens to all of this and starts to stand up. He puts his hand on Rim's shoulder and asks if that's what he considers being handicapped. Myung smiles and says he doesn't care about any of that, and asks if they can at least do an interview first. He also says that this is an official recruitment for Rim. The protagonist starts to feel happy about this, and then shakes Myung's hand, thanking him for his kindness. The two go to the restaurant, and Rim finds it amazing, as he heard it was small, but it was far from small. Myung comments that he spent a lot of money on the interior design and asks what Rim thinks. He replies that it looks very beautiful and has an old and luxurious appearance. The protagonist, still surprised, says that his house is right behind the police station, so it's not even 5 minutes from there. Myung says it is definitely destiny. They observe the outside, but the restaurant owner asks them to come inside to show the interior. Rim is completely amazed when he enters the restaurant. He sees the size of the interior and says he really likes the place. They then go to the kitchen, and Rim is impressed with the organization of things. Myung comments that they bought everything new, so they only have the basic ingredients. Myung sits down and apologizes for not asking his name until now, as he knew him as the assistant chef. The protagonist replies that it's no problem and informs him that his name is Rim. Myung looks at Rim and asks if they can start the interview at that moment. Rim, smiling, responds that they can. Myung asks if Rim is confident in his cooking and asks him to prepare any dish. The protagonist asks if that's really okay. Myung replies that it's no problem. The interview for a chef is through his cooking. The restaurant owner, happy, says that any popular Korean dish is fine, and that bibimbap will also do. Rim responds that it will be fine. Myung is happy, knowing that Rim's bibimbap is incredible. The protagonist is thoughtful, considering that he can choose what he wants, and knowing it has to be a Korean dish. He realizes he needs to put a lot of effort into it and consider the theme carefully. After all his skills and sensitivity will be judged on a single dish. He observes some meats, and also kimchi. He imagines that, in any case, there aren't many ingredients since the restaurant hasn't opened yet. He starts looking at the spices and notices that only the basics are there, but at least there's chili powder. He looks at the shelf and imagines he is free to choose, but there are a few options like ramen, thin noodles, sesame oil, etc. To make matters worse, he can't make gourmet dishes that depend on smell and taste. Then he feels happy as an idea comes to him. He decides to prepare noodles and starts gathering the ingredients in the pot. He immediately sets it to cook. Myung instantly smells a pleasant aroma coming from the kitchen. Time passes as the protagonist continues preparing the dish. He then presents the dish and says he has made radish noodle bibim. Myung is delighted with the dish. The owner comments that the kimchi was made by him and that it was a good choice. Rim is surprised to learn that Myung made the kimchi himself. Myung confirms, saying it's laborious, so he plans to hire someone else to do it. He then immediately tastes the dish. Upon tasting it, he is surprised by the flavor. At that moment, someone arrives at the restaurant shouting that they were hungry and the day was very hot. This man looks at Rim and asks who he is. He asks if Rim is the owner's son or nephew. Rim responds that he's there for an interview. The man introduces himself as Chulho, a food enthusiast who lives nearby. The protagonist bows his head and says his name is Rim, and it's a pleasure to meet him. Chulho sees that Myung isn't paying attention and asks if he's so hungry he won't even look up. Myung, as if lost in thought, says he was busy eating. Chulho turns to Rim and asks if he can have the same dish since Myung usually cooks, but he's occupied. The protagonist asks if noodles will be fine. Rim then prepares the same dish. Chulho reminisces that he used to eat a lot of noodles with kimchi in the past. He starts picking up the noodles with his chopsticks and warns Rim not to feel bad, as young people usually aren't good at cooking, but he won't criticize. He tells Rim it's an old person's habit and asks if he understands. Rim, feeling awkward, says it's no problem. Chulho then starts tasting the noodles. Immediately he feels something different in his body. He begins to think about the perfection of those noodles. They wrapped around his tongue like a real ribbon. He imagines that they are so tender that when they touch his tongue and throat, it feels like being caressed. He thinks the daikon is so fresh, spicy, crunchy, and sour. Chulho turns the entire bowl over and imagines that it's so fresh it seems to have just come from the sea. He even feels younger at that moment. Rim, shyly, asks if he will be accepted after the test. After that, Rim decides to go back to playing the game. The system notifies that if the user experiences eye tremors, fatigue, or headache while playing, they should stop immediately and consult a doctor. It also informs that to exit the game, just say exit system. The system welcomes him. He finds himself on a road in front of a forest. He recalls the interview he had and feels happy for having gotten the job. The protagonist is pleased to be back in the game and feels the refreshing air of the grass. He feels all his stress disappearing and thinks it must be because he hasn't played for a while. Rice is extremely happy and hears someone calling him, saying they finally found him. It's Seeking, saying it's been a while since he logged in, but he saw that Rice completed an important mission in the game. He mentions hearing that Rice killed the lizard princess. The protagonist asks if people are already talking about it. They start walking, and Seeking asks Rice why he's hiding it. The protagonist is confused since he's not hiding anything. Seeking comments that it's funny, as Rice started playing just to cook, and now he's a strong warrior. Seeking, imagining Rice in battle, says that few people have as much fun as the protagonist. Besides, every player is there for a different reward, and Rice is stronger than all of them, as well as being able to cook, which is amazing. Seeking, with shining eyes, asks Rice if he'll accept him to join a raid. The protagonist responds that it's no problem. He also asks where they are going now. Seeking says that everyone is heading to the integrated server and asks if he wasn't going there too. Rice asks what that is. Seeking says he's really innocent for not knowing anything and laughs a little. The protagonist responds that he really doesn't know much, just that forest and the beginner's area. Seeking says that forest is just the beginner's area indeed. Seeking then asks Rice if, when he finished creating his character, he didn't get an option to choose a server. Rice says he just clicked randomize and moved on. Seeking explains that it's not good to do that, as leaving the forest starts the integrated server with Korea. He explains that even if they just walk and eat the whole game, they won't have explored anything, so Rice will probably need guidance from here on. Seeking, excited, yells that after walking so much, they have apparently reached the integrated server. Rice is surprised as he doesn't know how it works. They look at the huge place, and Seeking says that this is where the game really begins. The protagonist can only think about how different the atmosphere is there. He sees a person being attacked by some pigs, and imagines that in the beginner's area, the atmosphere was relaxing, but here everything is frantic, as if there are fights all the time. He sees another person also fighting pigs, which are quite small. Seeking starts trembling and says that the time has finally come. He starts shouting that he's no longer a novice. Rice laughs and congratulates him for that, and even asks what they should do now. Seeking turns and says they can do whatever they want, but he will hunt since he joined the game for specific reasons. They look at some bees, and Seeking takes the opportunity to warn that in this server, the mobs, or monsters, attack without warning, unlike in the novice area, so Rice needs to be very careful. The bee, for example, has a lethal sting. Rice says he understands and imagines he'll get honey from them. Seeking says he will hunt until later, and they'll see each other then. He also asks if Rice added him as a friend. The protagonist takes his hand and says he did, and they can play together again later. Rice wonders if he can also cook in that place, and thinking about it, he sees a wind swirling around Seeking. At that moment, a card with a musical symbol appears above Seeking. Rice is confused and asks if that's a song. At that moment, Seeking was singing a song. The protagonist, confused, asks why he started singing out of nowhere. Seeking is happy and says Rice noticed because that's a new skill he acquired. Rice is surprised and asks if he really got a new skill, as they are rare. Seeking, smiling, says the skill is minstrel, and the song is called Military Song. He then decides to go his way and says he'll meet Rice later. The protagonist thinks that job really suits Seeking. He looks at a sign and imagines he should try heading somewhere else. All Rice could think about at that moment was what ingredients he would find in that new place. He walks to a small village and thinks he's excited about what's to come. At that moment, he sees a man announcing a green orb for 3,000 won. He also sees a woman shouting that a wolf cape is only 230,000 won. He stares intently at the people negotiating nearby. He observes a blacksmith working and imagines that even this is part of the game. It was possible to feel the heat when he got close. He sees another merchant holding a potion and imagines it must be another store. While Rice watches everything around him, he notices that it's strange that there are only adults in the village. He imagines it must be because the game is for adults only. He continues walking through the village and says that he really doesn't see a single child there. He imagines that, generally speaking, there aren't that many people, and wonders if that might be an issue. He looks up at a restaurant and thinks he might be overthinking it, especially since he's having fun wandering aimlessly. He notices that the sign is indeed for a restaurant and decides to go in to see what it's like. He opens the door and says he imagined there would be at least one restaurant there. The waitress greets him. Rice greets back and says he wants a table for one. The waitress looks serious and says they only have bread and soup to offer. He can't believe they only have those two options. He looks around the place and decides to tell the waitress he'll take the bread and soup anyway. She says that's fine. The waitress serves his dishes and he imagines he shouldn't have expected much since it can't even be considered a menu. He looks worriedly at the soup, but imagines it can't be that bad. He then takes a spoonful and immediately makes a disgusted face, sticking his tongue out and saying the food is horrible. Rice looks at the waitress and wonders how she dares to sell this. He decides he'll just order water since it's better than that dish. He feels upset because it's the first restaurant he visits in the game, and he already has a horrible first impression. He decides to take a piece of his chicken skewer to mix with the soup to save it. He also takes one of his fried eggs and puts it on the bread since he's very hungry. He opens a small pouch and imagines that when he first entered the game, he cried from happiness when eating grass. But he is a chef. Rice starts adding seasoning to the soup and says that if he didn't taste things like in real life, it would be okay. But since he does taste things here, it's a different story. He then finishes, the soup turned into chicken soup and the bread into a complete egg sandwich. Both gave the protagonist extra experience. Rice decides to taste the soup again and says that this time it's good, as the fat gave it flavor. He also bites the egg sandwich and says that although the bread is hard, the soft egg makes up for it. Rice is delighted with the taste since it's been a long time since he had a tasty egg sandwich. The waitress watches from a distance everything Rice did with the food. She approaches and calls for the protagonist's attention. He turns around, asking what she wants. At that moment, the system notifies Rice that he found a mission. The waitress, who had a question mark above her head signaling a mission, asks Rice if he happens to be a cook. She immediately begs him to help the restaurant. He thinks for a moment upon hearing her question. He looks fixedly at that question mark and imagines that it really is a mission. Rice smiles and answers that he is indeed a cook. The waitress says she noticed since he keeps eating that. He closes his eyes and begins to imagine what kind of mission it would be since last time he had to fight, but this one should be more relaxed. The woman asks Rice if he cooks as a hobby or if he's a professional chef. The protagonist answers that he cooks professionally. Right after he says that, the woman disappears from in front of him. She reappears beside him, tasting the soup that Rice had modified. He is startled, thinking that she seems to be hungry. The woman smiles and says she just wanted to taste his food. Rice notes that it's a big lie. The woman looks at the egg sandwich and says that she knows the food there isn't good, but she asks Rice to be honest and tell her what he thinks of the food. Rice is worried about how to respond. The system gives him two options. One to say the food is good, and the other to say that the food is honestly horrible. Rice feels downcast and says that even if it wasn't a game, as a chef, he needs to be honest, so he chooses the option to say the food is honestly horrible. The woman from the restaurant is completely disappointed and says that Rice must think she is the disappointment of the culinary profession. She feels sad, but says she has to face the facts, since if the food were good, there would be more customers there. She asks Rice if he can at least teach her how to make those dishes. The protagonist thinks it wouldn't hurt to help her in that situation. He then responds that, of course, he will help. He notices that the food has returned to its original state, probably for him to show her how the changes were made to those dishes. He opens his inventory and explains to the woman that he first needs the ingredients. He starts seasoning while saying it's not that hard to do it again. In the middle of the food preparation, a mission appears. Rice needs to cook for Rogellan and achieve at least 70 satisfaction points. The reward will be an increase in affinity with her. Rice hands the dish to Rogellan to try. She thanks him and says the appearance is great. She then takes a spoonful of the soup. Rice feels confident since she liked the previous dish, and this one is the same. He finds it strange to see that Rogellan's satisfaction is only at 32%. The woman is a bit thoughtful and says she doesn't like chicken very much. Rice is completely confused since she had said the first dish was great when she tasted it, but now it's not good enough. Rogellan then decides to try the egg sandwich. Rice tries to stay positive since there's no human on earth who doesn't like it. The woman makes a completely confused expression when biting the bread, and Rice doesn't understand anything anymore. Suddenly, Rogellan shouts with joy, saying the bread is wonderful. The satisfaction progress bar fills completely. The protagonist gives a slight smile and asks if at least the bread is to her liking. Rogellan responds that it definitely is. The woman puts her hand to her mouth and says those skills are similar to those of some travelers who passed through there. Rice asks what she means by travelers. The woman explains that the village used to be incredible and people from all over would come to visit. She then tells a story that happened in the past. A child looked at the sky. Suddenly he notices something red in the sky. That's when it appeared. A red rift emerged in the midst of a storm. It was the demon Raiden. It was possible to see several creatures emerging from that rift in the sky. There were many demons flying towards the village. Rogellan says the demons came and stole all the knowledge from the continent of Azella, leaving only people who knew almost nothing. Suddenly the people at the time looked up, scared of what was coming next. A hand appeared, launching a huge beam of light, taking away everyone's abilities. She says that's when she lost her ability to cook. The woman laments that from then on she could only make horrible soup and bread. Rice looks at her and imagines it's a sad story from that world. Apparently the demons stole the knowledge from there. He takes the opportunity to ask what she meant by calling him a traveler. She explains that the demon created a rift, and the people who cross through it are called travelers. Rice imagines he understands now. Basically, the so-called travelers are the players. Rogellan looks at Rice and says she has a favor to ask, and asks if he wants to learn her recipe. Rice is confused, thinking she wouldn't know any at that moment. The system then notifies him that there is a work mission in Rogellan's kitchen. She explains that in that village, it's only possible to prepare something with the ingredients available there. The system notifies that Rice needs to cook Rogellan's 2 recipes using only the ingredients that can be obtained within the village. The recipe is royal jelly. Rice reads it and finds the name interesting, responding to Rogellan that he wants to learn it. Rogellan, still sitting in the chair, makes it clear to Rice that the ingredients must be obtained within the village itself. Rice starts walking and replies that it's not a problem and that he will be back soon. He then leaves the restaurant and starts thinking, imagining that there won't be horned chickens or lizard princesses there. and to make matters worse, he can't use the ingredients he already has in his inventory. The protagonist starts walking and thinks he needs to discover what the village has to offer. He is looking at the sky and hears someone calling something cute. He looks ahead and sees 3 people trying to feed something. Rice approaches and hears a man saying that people there are foolish for giving strange things and asks for a healer. Someone is offering an apple and a pear to the cat. The player asks if it's part of the game since the cat isn't eating anything. The man points his finger at the other and says the person is very stupid since even dogs have things they like and things they don't like. The man gets furious and tells him to shut up since he knows very well what his cat likes. Rice looks at the cat and imagines it's the first time he's seen one in the game, and it's definitely not just a phase of the game. The cat stares at Rice, and suddenly a question mark appears above it. Rice notices that it seems to be a mission. He looks at the cat's owner and wonders if it's part of the mission he's already on. The cat's owner says he should just take the cat and leave. The protagonist kneels and tries to cheer up the cat somehow. He asks the cat if it's hungry. Rice pets it, and the cat just keeps meowing. People are surprised since the cat is reacting. The protagonist asks the cat why it doesn't want to eat, and if it's because the food doesn't smell good. The cat starts getting happy as Rice continues to pet it. The people around are incredulous that the cat is reacting to Rice and not to them. The protagonist keeps thinking, wondering if the cat understands because it's a game. He also thinks that cats are really cute, and that must be why people like them so much. Rice notices the question mark has disappeared and asks if the mission is completed. The system notifies him that the cat wants the royal jelly to be happy and asks if Rice can make it. The protagonist confirms that it is indeed part of the mission he was already on. He keeps thinking that this royal jelly is a rare dish and there are many killer bees nearby. But he will have to get it to complete both missions at the same time. The protagonist keeps looking at the kitten and says they are definitely cute. At that moment, the system informs him that he must feed the kitten with royal jelly. The reward is unknown. Rice pets the cat and asks it to wait a bit, as he will be back with something for it to eat. The cat looks sad while touching the protagonist. Rice feels sad thinking he can't leave such a cute cat alone there. He notices that a certain part of the village is more crowded, but it must be because it's a game for adults. So late at night, more people will be online. He hears some people arguing about the price of a product. Rice thinks that it's as crowded as in real life. The protagonist notices a vendor announcing each eye for 50,000 wons, and several people come to buy. He continues walking, seeing all the commotion of people selling and buying. Rice notices someone selling blue and red tension stones for 100,000 wons. The vendor says it's rare since the dungeon hasn't appeared for a long time. Rice can only notice that things are very expensive there. Continuing his way, Rice notices someone selling grilled chicken. He finds it interesting that someone there is selling food, but he notices something familiar. He looks closer and sees that the person in question once bought several chicken skewers from him and is apparently reselling them for a much higher price. Rice decides to grab a skewer and says that whether he likes it or not, it's not his problem. But it is expensive. He leaves the place, thinking that the skewer isn't something fancy anyway. At this moment, the vendor calls his attention, asking if that is Rice. Rice turns and notices that it's Ether, the one who made the boots for him. Ether says it's good to see him there, and that apparently Rice decided to go to the integrated server as well. Rice says he's happy to see him doing well, and mentions that he got there thanks to the net Ether gave him, which was very useful in defeating the lizard princess. Ether is happy, and asks if he really completed that mission. Rice looks at Ether and says yes, although he needed some company for that mission. Ether responds that, of course, he needed a team after all. He went to fight a powerful boss using basic items and alone. Ether looks at Rice and says that many bosses are powerful and need group control to defeat, and it seems Rice still doesn't understand that. Ether smiles and says that Rice is definitely incredible. The protagonist smiles and says he was just lucky. He takes the opportunity to ask if Ether is still making shoes. Ether responds that he makes not only shoes, with leather, he can make anything. Rice finds it interesting and asks what he can make with the item he has. At this moment, he summons the superior lizard leather. Ether is astonished and asks if that leather is from the lizard princess. The protagonist responds yes, and asks if it's possible to make something. Ether thinks for a moment, asking himself if he can do it. Rice imagines it must be something grand for Ether to doubt. Ether looks at Rice and says he needs to get a few things first, and asks the protagonist to buy them at the market. And after that, they can meet again. Some time passes, and both go to the meeting point. Ether apologizes for making Rice get all that stuff, and asks if everything went well. The protagonist replies yes. Ether takes the items and says it's great, and that he will start right away. He takes a fine needle and says it's the first time he's producing something from such high-quality leather, but it will all work out in the end. He gets serious and says he will begin. Rice says if he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't have to. Ether responds that it's too late to change his mind. He starts preparing the garment frenetically. Rice is astonished by the level of effort. The garment is sewn little by little. Ether is meticulous with every detail of the clothing. Rice, happy to see this, says that Ether seems to have improved a lot since the last time they met. Ether's eyes shine as he imagines his body as a sewing machine. With all his confidence, Ether says he's finally done and presents the set of clothes made from those materials. Rice is completely amazed, saying it's beautiful. At that moment, Ether receives a notification that he unlocked the achievement Luxurious Maker, which required making an item using components from a boss. The reward was a 10-point increase in dexterity. Ether is surprised as it's something he's never seen before. Rice is completely emotional about how wonderful the garment is, and praises Ether, who, on top of everything, achieved a luxurious classification. Ether tells Rice that he doesn't need to pay for anything. It's his own merit. The protagonist turns and asks if he's sure about that. Ether, content, responds yes, because if it weren't for Rice, he would never have known about such a luxurious classification. He achieved it thanks to all of Rice's items. Ether also says he wouldn't have even tried if it weren't for him, since he wouldn't have had those materials in hand. That said, there are more things he wants to test after achieving that. At that moment, Rice could only admire how beautiful his new outfit is. Elsewhere, some people are looking at a pig, saying it's the biggest they've seen so far. A man with a hammer asks if they really think they can hunt something like that. Another man responds that someone from the shop said they managed it alone, so the two of them should be able to do it. The man with the hammer starts sweating, thinking that he doesn't believe just because the classification is trash, they are going to try it. The pig looks furiously at the person, and they still decide to attack the animal. The pig then charges at full speed towards the two while they run away, realizing it was indeed a terrible idea. One of the men gets angry and throws a rock, hitting the pig squarely. The pig becomes enraged and charges at full speed, hitting the two men and throwing them away. Rice observes from a distance and says that it seems to be the spotted pig. He starts walking, wondering if he will be able to start the Samgyeopsal that day. The protagonist equips his weapon and runs towards the pig, taking advantage of his active weak point skill. He hits the animal squarely, combining it with his passive skills. Rice, now wearing his new clothes, looks back and is pleased that he managed to finish the pig with just one blow. He also asks the two men if they are okay, since it looked dangerous moments before. The man thanks him, saying he would be dead if it weren't for Rice. The protagonist helps him up and laments that his friend died because of the pig's blow. The man says he understands since he only survived due to having a bit more resistance. At that moment, someone says they just wanted a bit of Samgyeopsal, and it wasn't supposed to be so difficult. Rice looks to the side and says he was sure that Samgyeopsal really existed there. The man responds that it does, and they'll even give him some if he caught that pig. Rice imagines that his favorite food is, without a doubt, Samgyeopsal, especially after losing his sense of taste. The man tells Rice that he will skin the pig and asks if he can help with the meat. The protagonist asks if he will prepare it himself. The man, looking at his shield, says it's the old way. He will need to take the meat from the pig himself. They see the other man's hammer lying on the ground and say it's annoying, but since it's a game, they want to try it. Rice's eyes start to shine, saying it will be interesting, and he says he will have a Samgyeopsal party. The man asks if he is sure he will do it there and now. The man asks Rice if he can cut that pig. The protagonist responds that yes, after all he is a chef. The system then notifies that it is a spotted pig carcass, and if cut, will yield small quantities of meat. Rice notes that his chef's eyes skill makes it much easier to identify such things. The man asks if there's anything he can help with. Rice responds that at the moment, no. Rice begins to remember that he used to go up to the rooftop of the building with the guys to have a Samgyeopsal party. But after losing his sense of taste, he must have forgotten those memories. He remembers his friends happily saying that the protagonist worked hard that day and deserved all the best. One of the guys comments that the last customer who came to the restaurant was too annoying, and if it weren't for the protagonist, they probably would have ended up in a fight. Everyone says it's certain since Rim is kind-hearted. They all toast to Rim and tell everyone to drink until they drop. Rice remembers all this and imagines that there's not a single trace on his tongue of the taste of Samgyeopsal from that time. He even remembers being very happy back then, but he can't remember the taste of the food at all. The protagonist reflects, imagining that with his own hands, he will find that food again in this game. He visualizes the parts of the pig and says it is usually cut in half and then into 3 parts, totaling 6 pieces. The protagonist imagines that real is a very detailed game, but he wants to find out how realistic they are. Rice politely asks the man to lend him the sword. The man agrees and asks if it's okay that the sword's classification is broken. The protagonist holds the sword and says that it is fine as it is. Rice drives the sword into the pig and cuts it in half. He says that in this game, there is no distinction between male and female, so they can kill all the animals without worrying about gender. He begins to cut the pig and says he will do it in parts. The protagonist continues to focus on cutting the meat while the man watches, finding it all incredible, and even imagining that Rice must be a butcher. The man looks at the process and says it definitely looks like the carcasses hanging in butcher shops. Rice, concentrating, says it's now time to dismember the bones to get to the samgyeopsal part. The man is astonished, wondering what on earth Rice does for a living as he handles everything so naturally. Rice continues calmly, saying it's now time to remove the pig's head. The man asks who Rice is to be doing it so well. The protagonist feels relieved that it's finally over, and that from this point, he can finish with a dagger. He places his hand on the pig, and little by little starts slicing, imagining he needs to start under the skin, and then move to the ribs and finally the belly. He imagines that's the correct sequence. He continues cutting the meat and realizes he also needs to remove the tenderloin from the bones, which would make a great tonkatsu. Rice sees his progress and says it is indeed quite laborious, but it's finally yielding results. Rice looks around and wonders what he could use there as a grill. He then spots something. He looks at the shield and says he found a grill. The man is shocked and asks if Rice is sure he will use a shield as a grill. Rice, pleased, says yes, it will serve perfectly for grilling that meat. The protagonist is happy as the preparations are ready to cook the samgyeopsal. The man sees and says it looks very nice and smells delicious. The man wonders if Rice is really preparing samgyeopsal. At that moment, other people approach. They comment that it must be a joke since the local restaurants only serve soup and bread. The protagonist calmly cuts that piece of meat. A couple watching are amazed at how good the meat looks. Rice then places the meat on a skewer, and it looks fantastic. Rice is pleased to see the result of his preparation, while the people find the skewer marvelous. Rice keeps staring at the skewer and wonders if it really tastes good. He opens his mouth, wondering what the taste will be like. He imagines what samgyeopsal tasted like. He begins to chew the meat he just prepared slowly. Immediately he remembers all his friends praising that his samgyeopsal is the most delicious there is. The protagonist is extremely happy and says that his samgyeopsal is definitely the best there is. He looks at his skewer and says the brown, grilled, and crispy parts are giving it a wonderful flavor, along with the oil covering everything. He takes another bite and says he definitely now remembers how good it tasted. The man also grabs a skewer and asks if that's how he should hold it. He quickly takes a bite of the meat. At that moment, his expression changes completely. He finds the flavor so crispy that he even suffers damage from how good it was. The man starts to cry, saying it's extremely delicious. Rice simply agrees, saying that samgyeopsal is indeed the best dish there is. The protagonist reaches for his weapon, saying he's now satisfied and won't hold back anymore. He says, for the missions menu, he will make samgyeopsal skewers. He quickly activates his weak point skill and says he will initially need 100 pieces of pork. The pigs around the area start to get worried. Rice begins chasing the various pigs while hearing someone say they remember Rice as the same guy who made the chicken skewers. At that moment, a woman was observing all the game's events on her system screen. She hears some people talking, asking if they'll be free after work. Another person asks why, if it's to compare food. The woman crosses her arms while people around her continue talking. She looks at Rice eating the samgyeopsal skewer and finds it interesting. The people around continue talking about confessing to someone and asking if the person has plans for today. The woman remains restless, watching Rice eating that dish while people around her continue gossiping about relationships. She sees another image of the protagonist enjoying the dish, and again, the people around her keep talking about lovers. The woman grows increasingly impatient, and the people around her ask for silence so as not to disturb the boss. At that moment, there are other people also working with the system screens. The woman then grabs everyone's attention. She raises her hand and shouts that they will have a group dinner and that they will eat samgyeopsal. She informs everyone that attendance is mandatory. Rice continues preparing various meats simultaneously, using the shield as a grill. He keeps cutting a piece of pork, thinking he's done it 389 times. He focuses on the cut and imagines that after doing it so many times, he should be able to do it with his eyes closed. People approach the protagonist and see the pile of pig carcasses, asking if the place is a slaughterhouse. Rice continues preparing until he reaches the 400th dish. After that, he places his dagger on the ground and says he needs to rest a bit. He begins to rest and notices that the system is notifying him of a new achievement. The system informs that Rice has obtained the F-rank butcher skill after slaughtering 400 monsters. He is amazed by the skill, as it will now be possible to store more materials. The system says that the skill is passive and reduces the amount of food wasted. He ponders whether he should use this for the culinary mission or not. Several people are around him at that moment. He grabs his bag and thinks that if he is to complete the mission, he should make it even tastier. He looks at his improvised grill and says it reminds him a lot of his past. The protagonist begins to imagine that samgyeopsal with lettuce, chili, and onion is perfect when accompanied by good cooked rice. He also imagines that if served with cold beef noodle soup, it would be wonderful. After thinking about all this, he wonders what he can eat in that game. He clenches his fist and says that the taste and aroma he will not be able to experience again in real life, so he must grill a few hundred more times before going back. He looks at what he has already prepared and sees that he has 10 meat skewers and 19 pieces of leftover samgyeopsal. He realizes he needs more salt, but his salt jars are empty. He then remembers he has a unique cooking skill and wonders if he should use this skill, chef's blessing, at that moment. He uses the skill, and the system asks what the user desires. Rice, concentrating hard to keep his skill active, shouts that he needs salt right now. Suddenly, a portal appears in front of him through magic. At that moment, 2 small jars fall into his hands. Rice is baffled by what just happened. He notices they are 2 40-gram bottles, and then he needs to leave. He goes to the grill and starts salting the meat. He complains that it's very hot, and that he's sweating since he's been near the fire all day. The protagonist imagines he must be the first player to grill meat in that game. Rice finally stands up and stretches his body. He finally has 19 pieces of leftover meat and says that it is extremely exhausting. He looks around and wonders if he should look for some vegetables. After all, he is a chef. His mouth starts to water as he imagines finding something to eat along the way. Rice continues searching for vegetables and is amazed to find carrots and cucumbers in a field. Now he just needs to find honey and royal jelly. He remembers Seeking mentioning a supposed bee monster that could provide that honey. He thinks it must be nearby. At that very moment, he is attacked by a wasp. It startles him as he didn't expect it. The protagonist looks up and can't believe he was attacked by a wasp out of nowhere. He can only think that it is definitely different from the horned chicken and even the lizard princess. The protagonist realizes that that wasp is much more aggressive than the other animals he faced and feels relieved to have that frying pan as a shield. The bee stares at Rice, and he stares back, activating his weak point ability. At this moment, the bee attacks with extreme speed, frightening the prota, who throws himself to the ground, unable to believe that a bee could be so fast. He looks back at the bee still with his ability activated and says it shouldn't have missed, and therefore, it will pay dearly. The bee wastes no time and prepares to attack again. This time, she aims her stinger well and flies with all her might towards Rice. The protagonist wastes no time and jumps towards the bee. He hits the bee's abdomen head-on, activating his thrust ability. He feels relieved to have defeated the bee, but for a minute he worried, as the thrust ability isn't working so well. He's also surprised to have gotten a drop of honey. He ponders, thinking that if the amount is always so low, it's more worthwhile to go straight to the hive to get honey. At that moment, he is startled to see several bees coming to attack in a group. He prepares again and gets excited, wanting to see how it will be against a whole group. The bees attack all at once, but Rice defends himself using his shield. Without wasting time, he activates his weak point ability. He immediately locates the weak point of all of them. Then, without wasting time, he activates his thrust ability, charging enormous power at the tip of his weapon. Then he runs through all the bees using the thrust ability, always focusing on their weak points. Rice smiles, imagining that if he does this, then the bees will come to him. 30 minutes pass, and Rice is already tired, wondering when the hive will appear. He picks up one of the honey drops and doesn't know if it can be used as an ingredient or not, so he decides to try something. He puts a little on his finger and imagines he may not spend much, just to try. He puts his finger to his mouth and is amazed at how sweet that honey is. He even feels like a bear. He then can't resist and empties the entire pot of honey into his mouth. After that, he completely changes his expression, saying he won't stop playing that game until he finds the damn hive. The prota continues walking through the region and hears screams from some people. 2 men are complaining that they can't move their bodies and call the monster a bastard for using something paralyzing on them. A third man, quite injured, regrets that this is happening and says they should have leveled up at least 5 levels before going there. He's trembling as he says he thought that strength alone was enough until whoever appeared. They were facing the queen bee boss. One of the men says it's all King's fault. He just apologizes for them being in that situation. The queen bee stares at the men with a terrifying look, leaving them all in panic. Rice also doesn't understand anything, as he approached too closely and also felt the bee's stare. At that moment, the system warns that the queen bee recognized Rice as an enemy for entering her range. It was possible to hear from afar everyone complaining that their bodies don't respond. One of the men says that the game reflects 30% of the damage caused to real life, meaning all the damage he takes, he'll feel 30% in real life. But being stung by such a big bee like that? He says this while looking at those huge bee eyes. He says he'll probably die if stung by that. The three are in despair, wondering what they will do in front of that enormous bee. King, already trembling a lot, imagines it's his responsibility to find a solution, since he insisted on facing that boss, even though they all didn't have enough level for it. The bee wastes no time, and already prepares her stinger, and she attacks one of the players with all her might, immediately putting his HP in the red, while the other two run away, since the paralysis effect has finally worn off. The queen bee stares fixedly at the man she stung, and all he can do at the moment is beg her to stop. She then forcefully plunges her stinger into the man's belly, making him scream loudly due to the reality of how sharp that game is, feeling like a very sharp death. Macho King then says he'll do something even though he's a farmer. His partner is desperate at that moment. The queen bee wastes no time and also strikes her stinger into Macho King's partner. After being stung, he tells them not to take the item he received. Macho King asks him to relax, saying he'll save the item and return it to him. With only him left, Macho King decides to leap toward the queen bee, saying he'll avenge everyone. After jumping, he notices something strange. The queen bee looks terrifying. Furthermore, she has that enormous stinger pointed at Macho King's face. Rice wastes no time seeing that and starts running toward the queen bee, while Macho King just screams, asking her not to sting him. The Prota approaches, already landing a blow on the bee's abdomen. Macho King is surprised that someone came to help and asks who it is. The queen bee also stares at him, becoming more furious. The Prota also becomes serious, already imagining that if he gets that queen bee, he'll probably get the whole hive to show up there. The monster wastes no time and strikes at the Prota, who defends himself using the shield. He wonders if it will be possible to get royal jelly from that giant bee, because if so, he needs to take her down at all costs. He continues defending himself, but he realizes it's more difficult than he imagined. He then counterattacks using his thrust ability, causing an explosion of energy in the queen bee. The attack has no effect against the queen bee, as she continues attacking Rice as if nothing had happened. Rice becomes more serious and says he'll try once more. Then, with his ability activated, he focuses on where the boss's weak point is. He attacks with all his might, shouting the name of his ability, Thrust. The brilliance of the attack could be seen even from the sky. The queen bee, at that moment, realized it was going to go wrong. The attack then pierces through the bee, causing another huge explosion, but this time hitting her weak spot head-on. The bee then falls to the ground, leaving Rice relieved. After she dies, her drop was queen bee wings and royal jelly. The Prota is happy to see that the boss already drops royal jelly. He continues content, knowing that royal jelly can now be obtained by killing the queen bee and without having to go to the hive. He's relieved as with this, he finished the mission. The remaining man approaches Rice, thanking him, as thanks to him, the man stayed alive. Rice says it's no problem. The man then puffs up his chest and says his name is Macho King, and he would like to be Rice's brother, or rather, he could be the loyal dog of the Prota. Rice, not believing it, says he really doesn't need any of that. Macho King, with shining eyes, says he can be anything. If not a brother and not a dog, then he can just be a butler. Rice responds that there's no chance of that happening. Rice manages to escape the area, relieved that Macho King didn't follow him, especially because that man said some very strange things. Rice also becomes worried, as he probably just gained another crazy follower. He takes a deep breath and says it's all right. After all, in games, you're destined to meet many other people. He says this, and then realizes he's in front of a huge tree he had never seen before in his life. He looks closely and imagines that perhaps at the top of that tree, there might be some special fruit that can be used as an ingredient. He begins to climb the tree, activating his special lizard ability. With this ability, he can climb up to 20 meters. He continues climbing calmly. Upon reaching the top, he spots a nest and says he already suspected there was something hidden up there. He takes one of the eggs and is pleased, as apparently, it can be used as an ingredient, since the system is informing that it is a mayonnaise egg. Just add sugar and salt, and after mixing well, it will make mayonnaise. Rice is happy, as apparently many unimaginable things are possible there, since it's a game, and that's quite interesting. He closes his eyes and stops to think that in every part of the game, there's some convenient function for cooking, and that's amazing considering it's just a game. Rice looks up and says he's trying to understand all the details of that huge game since in the future, there will be much more to experience. He then resumes walking through the forest, heading back to the village. Back in the village, there are several people still with the kitten, saying that apparently he's very tired, and to make matters worse, he hasn't eaten anything all day. They look at the sad kitten and ask if there wasn't an adventurer who left earlier to fetch food, but hasn't returned yet. One of the men asks if the cat takes too long to be treated. Will it die, and the mission will end? The other man replies that probably yes, since the game is very realistic. It's definitely quite cruel. At this moment, the message "Mission Complete" appears in the environment, making everyone look back. Rice finally managed to return to the village. He's quite injured as he says he finally brought food for the kitten. The cat becomes extremely happy to see Rice with his favorite food. The prota smiles and apologizes if he made him wait for so long. He bends down and tells the kitten that he doesn't need to worry anymore, as his food is there. The prota smiles and apologizes again for the delay. He opens the jar of royal jelly and asks if that's really what the cat wanted. The cat approaches and starts to smell the royal jelly. The people around are surprised since Rice received a mission from a cat. Another player comments that the mission was to feed the cat, and apparently that game has everything. The cat then tries the royal jelly and becomes extremely happy, indicating that it really worked. At this moment, the system notifies that the mission has been completed, and as a reward, Rice will receive a kitten full of secrets as a pet. Rice is surprised since apparently he received that kitten as a pet. He picks up the kitten in his hand and says he didn't imagine that. The system asks Rice to give a name to the cat. The prota looks at the happy cat and wonders what name to give. He notices that the cat keeps meowing all the time. Rice starts petting his new cat and says his new name will be Meow. The system notifies that Meow is now the prota's new pet. Meow has 100 life points, 10 attack power, 10 agility, and 10 defense. He has a maximum of 100 affection and 100 maximum hunger. The system also informs a skill of the cat that, by stretching on its owner, the massage will recover 50 life points in exchange for 50 hunger points. Rice is content and asks Meow to stay close to him, ensuring he never goes hungry. People observe Rice and find it incredible that the cat is actually obeying him besides being very cute. Another player asks to stop the drama since it's just a game. One of the players asks what kind of pet that cat is. The woman replies that she didn't even know there was something like that in the game system. At this moment, Yuria appears, informing that in the real game, if a player completes a set of requirements, they can have pets. One of the players takes the opportunity to ask if pets aren't paid items. In that case, would you have to pay to get them? Yuria replies that it's also possible by earning game money, but it's not the only method to get a pet. Everyone is surprised by this information. She looks at Rice's kitten and says it's much more important when players go beyond the standard rules. She looks at Rice and says that players need to blaze a new path on their own, and that's the difference of the real game compared to other RPGs. Yuria smiles and tells all the players that they need to think outside the box, since real is a game where you shouldn't follow a fixed path to succeed. The players stop to think after that, and say that indeed, just hunting in the game is boring. Outro Jogador comments that a friend of his won an arm wrestling competition and still received a huge reward. The players continue chatting, while Yuria observes how everyone has changed their way of thinking. She's happy, as wherever Rice goes, people change. Rice continues happily while giving royal jelly to his cat, and Yuria can only imagine what kind of person he is. She smiles, and then gradually disappears from the scene while saying that if she has a chance, she would like to get to know the prota better. Rice goes to the village's restaurant and notices Rosalind sleeping under the table. She then wakes up and notices that Rice is back. He asks if she waited long, but if she's not busy, he'd like to start quickly. Rosalind, not understanding, asks, "Start what?" She asks this, but immediately remembers what it's about and says it's true. They still need to cook, but she hasn't washed the dishes yet. Rice is startled, saying that NPC is too realistic. The prota puts the ingredients on the table and tells Rosalind that he brought some meat from the spotted pigs he hunted earlier. He says he'll prepare samgyeopsal as the main dish and will use the vegetables to make the sauce and the sandwiches. Rosalind is surprised by all those ingredients and asks the prota if he caught the spotted pigs by himself. He replies yes, and also says he can buy meat from some adventurers if necessary. She's relieved to know that. Rice starts preparing the meat while telling Rosalind that it's quite interesting for her to talk to tourists and adventurers since they are chefs. For that reason, they can focus only on the kitchen. He looks at Rosalind and politely asks her to grill 2 strips of samgyeopsal. She says it's okay and asks if she just puts them there. Rice sets up the grill and replies yes, that she can grill them right above the charcoal. He also explains that when the oil surrounds the meat, she needs to turn it to make it juicier. Rice also asks her kindly to put the vegetables and explains that they can't have any dirt on them, so please make sure they're well cleaned. The prota starts cutting the carrot. He ponders, as that's not his kitchen knife, so it's not as comfortable to cut. He grabs and puts the whole carrot in the frying pan. Rosalind approaches the prota and says that unfortunately, she can't use any abilities. Rice summons one of the ingredients and asks her not to worry. She can just boil the sehua flowers he bought earlier. She's relieved, as she thought she'd need to use some kind of ability. The prota chuckles and decides to add soy sauce to fry together. He also gives Rosalind a tip, saying she can collect vegetables from outside while walking around the village. She thanks him, as apparently he thought of everything. Rice pauses for a moment and asks Rosalind if she's not forgetting something. She's confused and asks forgetting what. He says about the meat she needs to turn on the grill. She says it's true and apologizes for forgetting, as her mind just blanked out. After that, Rice finally finishes his skewer of meat. Rosalind is amazed as it looks delicious. The system notifies that Rice delivered skewered samgyeopsal to Rosalind. He continues preparing another dish now, saying that just by putting the fried sauce with the samgyeopsal, it will be possible to make a pork bulgogi rice. The system informs that another dish has been prepared and that after eating it, 30 hunger points can be recovered. Rice takes the opportunity and says he'll also put a mayonnaise egg in the bowl. He explains that if sprinkled with salt and sugar and mixed well, it will make mayonnaise. Rice continues preparing his dish, saying that just by mixing the mayonnaise with honey and spreading it on the bread and inside, he puts the pork bulgogi and some cucumbers, which will be wonderful. The prota then finishes all the dishes, namely the skewered samgyeopsal, pork bulgogi sandwich, and another dish, just of pork bulgogi. Rosalind is amazed at all those dishes and says that Rice did an excellent job. Everything is perfect. The prota says that if you set up the table nicely, the environment becomes more pleasant. Rosalind, pleased, asks if she can try those dishes. He replies yes. She thanks him, takes a portion with the fork, and says that will be the novelty of her shop. Then she takes a bite of that portion. After that, the system informs that, thanks to the development with Rice, Rosalind has returned to who she was. Now the village of Turco won't need to eat just tasteless bread and soup. Now with the new recipes given to Rosalind, the story will be different thanks to Rice. The system then notifies that the prota's mission was successfully completed, and as a reward, he gained a favor from Rosalind, also acquired the royal jelly recipe, and unlocked a secret achievement. Rice is extremely happy, even more so since he increased his popularity with Rosalind and also received the royal jelly recipe. At this moment, the system gives a special information, saying that Rice has gained the interest of the culinary god Michelin. Rice changes his expression, wondering what this so-called culinary god would be. Far away, a person is battling against the lizard princess. The system notifies that the lizard princess was a recent hunt of the player Rice. This man notices that name appeared again. He ponders, wondering who this Rice is. The man opens his mouth wide and then starts devouring the lizard princess. The system notifies that, for ingesting a monster without even cooking it before, only 1% of the level capacity will be absorbed. This man wonders why there isn't any chef in that game to cook, as he finds it very inconvenient. The player's name is unknown, the level too. Only his profession is visible, which is gourmet. Rice continues looking at the dishes he prepared and ponders about this culinary god that appeared. He wonders what the system meant by the interest of the culinary god Michelin. The prota continues pensive, imagining that apparently even gods exist in the game, so there are really many interesting things to discover yet. Rice starts looking at his kitten and hears Rosalind saying to him that she wants to give something as a thank you. She says she would like to give all those kitchen utensils she has but no longer uses. He is surprised by that and asks if she's sure. Those are low-level kitchen utensils. She asks him not to worry after all. She even taught him a new item to put on the menu. The prota thanks her kindness and says that really wasn't necessary. Rice looks at the restaurant emblem and tells Rosalind that now she needs to practice her cooking a lot to serve plenty of customers. She says she will practice a lot and asks if he will capture a demon now. Rice is puzzled by what she meant by demon. Rosalind comments that all the outsiders who cross the dimension always end up going after the demon. He says he understood, however, his interest is only in cooking. He then decides to leave and wishes her good luck in her future sales. She thanks him and wishes good luck on Rice's journey and says he can always come back to eat. The happy little kitten also says goodbye to Rosalind. She feels happy in that moment. After Rice leaves, her restaurant becomes the most popular place in the whole village. A couple enters the restaurant asking for 2 portions of samgyeopsal. The woman, pleased, says they should order 3 portions instead of 2. A man hands over a ticket saying they're the 4th customer in line, so they should wait a bit. The player is outraged, saying they don't have to wait for anything since it's just a game. The player, after saying that, notices that the attendant is twice his size and apologizes, saying that they'll probably be very quick so they'll wait a bit. His wife says it really is a great idea for them to wait quietly. Several players from all sides go to Rosalind's restaurant, making the place very popular. The customers try the dishes and find them unbelievably amazing. They can't believe how good all the dishes are. After all, the dishes are exactly the same as what Rice used to make. 2 customers continue eating the grilled meat and bulgogi, and they find it amazing how delicious each dish is. Rosalind is pleased to see the customer satisfaction. In the game, players don't need to worry about gaining weight, so they can eat freely. After that, the restaurant gains an absurd number of visitors. Some time passes. 2 people are commenting on a restaurant that opened and serves samgyeopsal. The other player mentions that it also has pork bulgogi. Rice passes by these people and notices that they are talking about Rosalind's restaurant. He realizes that his work is being officially sold, bringing back memories of when he prepared a menu that ended up being made by luck. Suddenly, he notices his cat tapping its tail on his nose. Rice looks up and sees that the cat has calmed down and wonders if pets also sleep there in the game. He notices that the kitten is actually sleeping and decides not to wake him up. The prota is happy and wonders if he has never had a pet before and asks if it's like that in real life too. Rice looks at an inn and says that since Meow is sleeping, then he should rest too. At this moment, a person comes running and notices the prota's silver hair and asks if he is the person he is thinking of. The extremely tired-looking man approaches and asks if it's Rice who is there. The prota, not understanding anything, replies that his name is indeed Rice and asks if that person is okay. The extremely tired man from running says that he heard about the prota through Rosalind and has been looking for him all this time. The man introduces himself, saying that his name is Ferguson, and says that he has been looking for the prota to ask him for a favor. Rice notices that an exclamation mark appeared on that man's head and wonders if that's a mission. Rice asks what he wants. Ferguson tells a story about his father who, when he was younger, was a great mercenary. His father fought countless battles, but now he is retired. Ferguson explains that, due to some reasons, his father has slowly been losing the ability to taste food, and now his taste has completely disappeared, making him feel less alive lately, turning him into an alcoholic. At this moment, the system informs about the new mission. The mission is to prepare a meal that satisfies Ferguson's father. The reward will be Ferguson's father's treasure and an increase in popularity among them. However, if he fails, there is a penalty, which is a significant drop in popularity among them. Rice is surprised by that, as it is the first time he sees that a mission has a penalty if not successfully completed. Ferguson, with a sad face, asks Rice if he could help his father. The prota is concerned, as the requirements to complete the mission are quite vague. Rice had 2 options to choose from and decides to refuse, apologizing. But he thinks it's not time to get involved in this type of work. Ferguson turns around and starts crying, apologizing for making such an exorbitant request. He asks Rice if he changes his mind to meet him at his blacksmith shop. Rice notices Ferguson's trembling voice and asks him not to be like that. After that, Rice decides to visit a shop and thinks about Ferguson's father's story, which is extremely familiar to what he went through in real life, and that was a bother. The attendant notices that there is a cat on the customer's head. He informs Rice that normally they don't allow animals there, but he will let him in if he buys at least 1 item. Rice finds the place amazing, resembling something out of a movie. He ponders, imagining that there are things there that look more like a museum. At this moment, something catches his attention. He notices a cape called Ether's Legacy that has 30 defense points and an additional 5 points of resistance against everything. The cape costs 500,000 won. Another item is a glove that gives 25 defense points and costs 200,000 won. Rice finds those items amazing, especially since they are from his friend Ether, and it was expected to be very good. The store employee shouts not to touch the items if not buying. The prota turns around and says he will take the gloves and also take the cape. The attendant is happy and says he will assist him right away with this purchase. The Prota imagines that if they are items produced by Ether, then they are reliable. The Prota then leaves the store, while the attendant asks him to come back anytime. Rice equips himself with his new accessories, finding it incredible. At this moment, the system informs that Rice completed an achievement understanding attributes. The requirement was to use some equipment related to all attributes, and as a reward acquired status related to attributes. Rice is confused seeing that system notification since he didn't understand what it meant. The system congratulates him, saying that he has now acquired a status. The system explains that the status attribute is a measure of affinity and resistance against various elements. It gives an example of the fire attribute being 5, so the damage will be increased against wind monsters, as they are weak against fire. The system also explains that the opposite also applies. If the wind attacks the fire, then the damage will be reduced. Rice gets bored reading all this and thinks that, although he understood, he probably won't remember all of it. The Prota starts walking again and just thinks that it is probably a good thing, but he is not in the mood to focus on it as there is a nice breeze in that place. In another location nearby, a portion of pork bulgogi is being served. The person thanks. It was Melina, with water in her mouth, imagining that it is the first time she will eat that dish in the game and wonders what it will taste like. Someone approaches asking for permission to sit there. Melina looks to the side and is surprised as the person asks if they can, but then sits down at the same time. She notices that it is the so-called king of Korean cuisine and can't believe he is there. She feels totally embarrassed and asks him what he is doing there. The king of Korean cuisine laughs and tells her not to worry, that he is not stalking her. He just wants a portion of pork bulgogi. He tells Melina that this meeting is just a coincidence, especially since they both ordered the same dish. She yells at him, saying that he just copied her dish. Melina is worried since the so-called king of Korean cuisine dared to show up there and even copied her dish, and is coming up with a story that he was nearby and decided to visit the restaurant by coincidence. Daewon, who is the king of Korean cuisine, keeps talking loudly saying he's ready to eat. He doesn't notice, but he's annoying the people around him who shouted him to shut up. Daewon comments to Melina if she remembers how he was passionate about Rice's skewers. He found out it wasn't the case, and that it's because the game is good. Melina says she didn't understand what he meant. Daewon explains that even NPCs cook well, so the game is well made and not that Rice's food is good. Melina laughs and asks the so-called king of Korean cuisine to look at the details of the food he's eating. He takes a portion of the food and opens the system to see the details. The system informs that pork bulgogi is a specialty of Rice. Daewon can't believe it. He is shocked and says he can't believe it must be the same for the other dishes. He looks at all the other dishes at the restaurant, and they are all Rice's specialties, with all the ingredients and preparation methods coming from him. The king of Korean cuisine is completely disappointed as it seems he is a nobody while Rice dominates everything when it comes to food. He gives a loud shout in the restaurant, ultimately refusing to acknowledge Rice's culinary skills. After all this, Rim decides to take off the game glasses and asks if it's morning already. He looks at his bed and imagines that he has been playing for a long time, and it would be interesting if he slept a little. He sits on the bed and thinks that first he should eat before resting. He ponders, saying that inside the game he cooked, ate, and died all the time. But that was in a virtual reality. In real life he needs to eat. Not only that, but he needs to live in the real world.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like the video. Thank you.